Joe Rogan Podcast. Check it out.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan Podcast by night, all day.
We're up. What's happening?
Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Good to see you again. Ben, nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Joe.
I've enjoyed your videos, and
Thank
I've
you.
enjoyed your videos, of course. Jimmy, I watched your whole series on Atlanta all day today. I've been watching for hours. I've been watching impact videos about the Atlanta structure, and so let's just get into it.
Let's do it. So the Richot structure, I was on your show a little over a year ago and shared some details about it. To people who aren't aware, there's a location in the Western Sahara Desert of Mauritania called the Richot structure. It's also commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara. It is a site that most people have never seen or heard of before, which is truly peculiar because it's so spectacular. It's a site that astronauts typically use to reference from space. It is a geological feature that is said to be volcanic in nature. And what's so spectacular about this is that it just so happens to match more than a dozen striking similarities to what Plato had described as the lost ancient capital city of Atlantis.
I almost feel like we're not going to do your video justice by just talking about it, because the video is so good and you go into so many details. By the end of it, my jaw was dropped. I was like, holy shit. Like, from what you had the last time you were on the podcast to what you put out now, it's even more compelling. Like, way more compelling.
I appreciate you saying that. And I guess to anyone that wants to check it out, I have a YouTube channel called Bright Insight. It's right at the top of the page, and it says Lost Ancient Roman Map has Atlantis and Sahara Africa. And that's kind of where it goes from there, is that there is a... Actually, let me just mention real quick. Like, you're a very inquisitive individual. You have many interesting people that come and chat with you. And when I had asked you last time, you said that until you had saw my video, you'd never seen or heard of the Richot structure.
Never heard of it, yeah.
Anytime I meet somebody new, or if I'm at some party and be like, oh, what do you do? And we start chatting about YouTube, the first thing I do now is I show them a picture of the Richot. And I've never, not once, ever come across one single person that has seen or heard of it before, other than people who are familiar with what I've shared.
But there's so many things, like the where the water flows to the south, where there's clear evidence of water erosion that took place after the volcano. There's so much that points to that possibly being Atlantis.
It's spectacular. So just to run down real quick, Plato had described Atlantis as being the capital. Let me just mention that, because it was an empire said to be made up of 10 kingdoms. And what I'm focusing on is the lost capital city, which was said to be made up of concentric circles, 3 of water, 2 of land, which matches the Richot structure. It also was said to have an opening to the sea at the south. And if you look at it from satellite imagery, you can clearly see that water had ran through it.
Let's take a look at that. Tell Jamie what image to pull up so we can...
And furthermore, it was said to have mountains to the north, and you just so happen to have mountains called the Atlas mountain chain, which Atlas was said to be the very first king of Atlantis. And what's interesting is that the very first known king of Mauritania, which is where the Richot structure is located, is also... Their very first known king was also named Atlas. And though I'm not saying that that's the same individual, but what we do today is we pass down names, right? Like, people like, oh, my dad's name's John, and so is my son. And so it's another striking similarity, but it goes further than that. Like, there's geological similarities, such as the fact that Atlantis was said to be made up of red, black, and white color stone, which is another similarity you see at the Richot structure. It was said to have an abundance of gold, and that the outer walls were lined with it. And it turns out that Mauritania is loaded with gold, and not only that, the richest person ever known to exist in all of mankind is Mansa Musa of the Mali Empire, which consisted partly of modern-day Mauritania. And he was so rich from gold that he would be richer than Elon Musk and, like, Bezos combined almost. Like, many unfathomable amount of billions of dollars. So that's another similarity.
What year was this?
Oh, this is 1300s or 1400s.
There he is.
Yeah, there we are. 1312, 1337.
What a great name, too. Mansa Musa.
But the similarities don't end there. There was said to be an abundance of elephants, which is one reason why to suggest that Atlantis would have been in Africa is because, well, besides the fact that elephants are known to be throughout Africa, they used to be in Mauritania. They're unfortunately pretty much extinct there today. But another little detail that most people aren't aware of, because they think of Atlantis like, oh, it must be at the bottom of the ocean. Well, that's not exactly how Plato worded it. He did describe that the aftermath of Atlantis followed a catastrophic event involving water. Is that what was left of Atlantis was reeds of grass and a shoal of mud that prevented ships from navigating to and from. And what people don't realize is that Sahara Africa, up until about 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, was totally green. It was tropical. It had the largest network, or one of the largest networks of rivers ever known to exist. It had the largest freshwater lake ever known to exist, which is Mega Lake Chad, which, just to put this into perspective, it is, if you take all the North American Great Lakes combined, that's 94,000 square miles of surface area, whereas Mega Lake Chad was 139,000.
Whoa. Massive.
Additionally, Atlantis, the capital, was said to have a river that went just north of it or next to it. And the Tamanrasset River went right through the Rishat structure, or just north of it, went all the way to the Atlas Mountains that I described, which is in modern-day Morocco. And the evidence is that it existed at that same period of time when Atlantis was said to be around 11,600 years ago prior to its destruction, up until about 5,000 years ago. So going back to my point, like, a lot of people see the Sahara Desert and they don't realize that this place was unbelievably different than it is today. And one of the things that's so important is that I know some people listening will, they hear Atlantis, they think, oh, it didn't exist.
Right.
Whether it existed or not, the evidence that we're going to chat about today to show you that there is conclusive evidence, I would say, that catastrophic water erosion, that the ocean had blasted through the Sahara tens of millions of years more recently than previously known. According to the science, 56 to 66 million years ago was the time of the Trans-Saharan Seaway, which was the last time the ocean blasted through it. However, there are a few lines of evidence that say otherwise. Besides the fact that anyone that looks at the Sahara Desert through the Google Earth app, you can see fluvial striations, which is signature traits of water erosion. This is confirmed by other experts that look into these things. I like to mention Randall Carlson. Mm-hmm. He's someone that's analyzed the area and has said, yes, this is catastrophic water erosion. So one of the signature lines of evidence that suggests that the ocean blasted through it far more recently was the largest volcano in Sahara Africa is in Chad. It's Mount Kusi, and there's a lava flow that goes through it that is dated at 12,000 or so years ago. The volcano itself is supposed to be somewhere between 1.2 and 2.3 million years ago. But if you look at Mount Kusi to the south, you can see, and I don't know, Jamie, if you're able to bring up one of the photos of that mountain chain, but you can see that the water erosion cuts off that lava flow directly to the south. Yeah, keep going over. A little bit right there. Okay, so go over a couple. That is the mountain, and you can see those striations, which are signature traits of water erosion. All those white blemishes are salt, and I should point out real quick that it is a confirmed fact that much of the Sahara has surface level salt. And you see those white blemishes on that mountain? That is not cloud. That is not snow. Those are salt deposits.
And surface level salt that would have been from the ocean?
That is what I suggest, because in the middle of that caldera, you have huge patches of salt. And is it reasonable to suggest that that salt existed before the creation of that volcano? Because it seems to me that all that salt would burn up. And,
right.
and not only that, there is scientific studies that show that there are gastropods, which are sea life, that existed inside that caldera that used to be 1,000 feet deep and dried up just a few thousand years ago. So the fact that this is an 11,000-foot volcano that has salt on top of it, I would say is corresponding evidence that the ocean had once went through it. And if you go over a couple more images, Jamie, you will see far better images that show you that. Okay, so notice how it cuts off. You see to the black right here? That is a lava flow that's dated around 12,000 or so years ago. And regardless of whether the volcano or that water erosion happened 12,000 years ago or 2 million years ago, that in itself is evidence that the ocean blasted through the Sahara Desert literally 50 to 60 million years more recently than previously known. And the implications of this, as far as climate science, as far as the topic of geology and cataclysms, cannot be overstated. I mean, does it not look like that lava flow was cut off by whatever type of erosion that is? Does it? I mean, that's...
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's such a clean line. And it aligns with all the water erosion marks that are to the left of it. Can you make that smaller, Jamie? Can you make it stretch it out? Yeah.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nothing. It's just like you could really clearly see that it looks like a line, like a water line passed through what was marked by the volcanic eruption.
And this is one thing I say, I'm like, it's visible to anyone that has eyes to see, but it turns out that the Sahara Desert is one of the least studied places on Earth, mostly because it's so inhospitable. It's an average of 125 degrees Fahrenheit much of the year. It is so unbelievably big that just to get out there, I mean, you need reliable aircraft or vehicles. Most of the countries out there are, I regret to say, third world in that you just don't have supplies. It's not feasible to just travel out there with a whole team on a whim. So most of it is essentially undocumented, and it's not a site. The Sahara as a whole isn't a site that gets much attention, unfortunately.
Ben, we got to bring you in, otherwise it's going to talk forever.
No, I was going to say something that you mentioned about the origin of, I guess, Plato's description. You said it was mud and grasses was like the aftermath. It's interesting. It's the topic I've been exploring recently. Is that does match some of the translations of origin stories from the ancient Egyptians. So it's like that the Temple of Horus at Edfu, it's this amazing structure, but it's literally covered head to toe in hieroglyphs and descriptions and all these types of things. But one of the stories in the translations they do talk about is this, what they would call the original point, or the primordial mound, the primordial island. They describe it as being an island that was surrounded by water that was sinking, and essentially these reeds that were growing on it that created a falcon's perch, and then the god, it was either Horus or Hurun, one of the falcon gods, alights on this perch and then gains divinity. But as part of that story, I mean, they and then he goes and forms Kemet, essentially the motherland Egypt, and it's this tale of them, I guess, their civilization moving and migrating to this new land. But they do talk about a whole stack of unknown gods and a whole culture that existed before that. It's an interesting correlation. It's something that Graham Hancock speculated about in his work with the Temple of Horus at Edfu. You know, they also have, you know, catastrophic flood myths and things like this. But it may be that whatever prior civilization, and that's might have been where the dynastic Egyptians actually got their origins from, because it seems clear that they've inherited some things from the past. That's a story they themselves tell.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that the story of Atlantis had come from Egypt.
That's one of the most bizarre parts about it. I didn't know this until just a few years ago either. It's like, oh, wait a second. Plato, his distant relative Solon had traveled there in search of knowledge because Egypt was the place to go for it. And
it was the priests of the Delta that told Solon. And they said that, so 6,000 years, or 9,000 years, prior to the time of Solon was when the sinking of this city happened. And that works out to be 9,600 BC, so 11,600 years ago, which is bang on exactly where now the geological evidence points to basically the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysms. Like we know something happened at the start at like 12,800, 900 years, and then 11,600 years ago was that end of the Younger Dryas that brought us up out of the cold spell and into the Holocene.
Isn't it crazy that that's a full 1,000 years and we think about it in like the same time period? Like, yeah, I mean, around that time.
I know, just
we're
playing around with it.
literally 11,600 to 12,800. We're literally talking about 1,000 fucking years.
It is.
It's so much time.
It's so much time that actually, if you go from 12,008, so basically, let's say 1,200 years. The English language, Old English, is only like 1,400 years, and Modern English is only like 400 or 500 years. So this is such a wide, a long period of time that we weren't even speaking the same language that in that same 1,000 years ago. When you think of it like that, it's
nuts.
A different world.
It's nuts. And if you think about the people that lived 1,000 years ago and how they lived, all of this that I've learned from Graham Hancock and from Randall Carlson and from you guys, all of it is so astonishing, and it all fits into place. It all makes sense. Like, why are we so fucked up? Like, why is civilization so wacky? Why do we have these weird structures that no one can really explain? And when you think about the fact that there's so much evidence that we were hit by comets, that we were hit by large objects. Like, I didn't know about that enormous crater that's in Antarctica.
Oh, yes. I don't know all the details on how old that one's supposed to be, but it's one of the largest, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a big one in Antarctica. I don't know that much about it, but another one have you heard of Burkle Crater? That's another one.
Yes.
Yeah, Burkle Crater, like the 20-mile hole in the bottom of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And when is that supposed to be from?
That was 5,000 years ago. They've dated that. It's something plopped down in the Indian Ocean, and it washed up these mega tsunamis on the coast of Madagascar and Western Australia that we can see in satellite images today. These got these like 500-600 foot high chevrons from where the water went miles inland, and they found organic material from the seabed in these chevrons, and then they date that with carbon-14 dating, and they put it right at 5,000 years ago, so 2,500 around that time BC, which is actually a really interesting date when you consider some of the, I guess, the publications that we rely on in our modern civilization today. The Bible, the Old Testament, wasn't written long after that, and if you think about where the Indian Ocean is, that could have been the source of the biblical flood. Like that would have washed up north into the Persian Gulf, flooded the hell out of that whole region.
It's just crazy that it's happened so many times.
That's what they say.
We like to think of history as being this linear thing. We started out as cave people, and then we branched out from Africa all across the world,
and that's the end of it.
And kept learning. And here we are today with cell phones. But no, we've been rocked like multiple times, many times, and there's real solid evidence. The Antarctica one, how old do they think that is?
I don't recall on that. I have to double check that. I'd have to do a Google, Jamie.
So researchers have discovered a crater 1.5 kilometers beneath the Antarctica ice crust, 482 kilometers in diameter. 482 kilometers in diameter. Holy shit.
What is that
Probably
to miles?
dates back to a meteorite impact 250 million years ago. Wow. Okay, so that's an old one.
That's like an order of magnitude bigger than anything related, even with the younger dry. I mean, that's
bigger than the dinosaur one, right?
Yeah, that's like 99 point whatever % extinction event.
So it just keeps happening. The Earth just over millions and millions of years and thousands of years that humans have been around. The Earth just keeps getting whacked.
The evidence is so overwhelming. In say going back to the younger, driest period of time, there's evidence when you say get whacked. More than 30% of all landmass at that time was charred, burned. They claim that it's more fires than existed in the time of the dinosaurs. Now, I don't know if that's an article I read on Science Alert. I don't know if they can truly prove that, but if nothing else, 30% of all landmass existing today was burned and scorched to death at that period of time. That like helps people to wrap their heads around like this. The world was on fire.
Yeah, that's the younger, driest mat. They estimate as part of the burning, and because there was floods and fire, and this correlates to a lot of origin myths from cultures all around the world. But yeah, 10% of the biomass, I think, so 9 to 10% of which is an inconceivable number. That's how much of the world was burnt, and that's now embedded in this black
10% of the biomass.
Yeah,
it's so crazy that there's like literally a dark line.
Yeah, in the ground
that shows where everything was on fire for a long fucking time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
crazy.
We barely survived it. We now have a correlation of not only population reduction, but a significant drop in like genetic diversity as a result. Like it's tied to the younger dryas. There's been a few good studies recently done at that. So we were one of the megafauna that the 50% of megafauna at the time that actually survived and got through that event.
How do they think people survived? Is there any speculation? And where did we survive? Like where was the good spot?
I think caves. I think a lot of it would have been underground. And I think they may have even known. Like I think there's some evidence to suggest that some of these, like Derinkuyu in Turkey, in the Cappadocia region could host tens of thousands of people. There's massive labyrinths all over Egypt, beneath Saqqara. There's miles and miles of tunnels and catacombs. I've been down into a bunch of them. And even when you look at sites like Göbekli Tepe, there's been some interpretations of the artwork on that site that seems to indicate a cosmic calendar. Like they're almost marking that date. We know that the ancients were watching the sky. Like they were concerned about it. And comet mythology is a fantastic topic for Randall. I talked with him about this quite a bit. The comet, it wasn't seen as a pretty thing in the sky. Like it was the harbinger of doom. Like comets and all those types of things were just seen as really bad things that they were preparing for. But I think we survived partly because of diversity and being spread out all around the world. There were parts of the world that weren't as badly touched, like Australia, for example. That whole continent wasn't as badly affected as, say, the Northern Hemisphere was from the younger dryas. But also caves, 100% caves and sheltered caves. Those big cities that they could take tens of thousands of people underground.
Yeah. Something wild that it's popped back up in my head, speaking of flooding and this 11,000-year time frame. going back to the Richat structure, there's a study that I came across that ties into the video that we were just mentioning, that off the west coast of Sahara, Africa, right in front of the Richat structure, there's an underwater seafloor slide dated at approximately 11,000 years ago. And keyword approximately, that the very symbol is in there. So they're not entirely sure the date, but in that time frame. And this sediment looks like in the shape that it was blasted from a flood of water coming out of the Sahara, just based on the nature of the shape of it, that's more than 200 miles wide and maybe 130, 140, 150 miles from north to south. And it's layered sediment that is 2,000 meters, more than a mile deep, and it's layered. This right here. So, one, it's corresponding evidence that massive force of water may have blown out of the Sahara. And the one reason why this is so significant is, besides the fact that it indicates a possible flood of 11,000 years ago, but if there was any remnants of Atlantis, if the Richat structure was the location, this is where you would want to go looking. I mean, it's, again, layered sediment. Thank you. Yeah, sediment. More than a mile deep.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just to put this into perspective, from going from east to west, based on this 200-mile, the widest point of the Florida Peninsula is 150 miles. Like, this is more than 50 miles wider than the entire state of Florida panhandle. I don't know. I mean, it's the same distance from New York City to where did I have that in? D.C. Excuse me. Yeah. So, like, this is literally evidence of a catastrophic flood. That's more than just a seafloor slide. Something bulldozed. And when you look at these fluvial erosions, to anyone that's looking at this right now, signature traits of catastrophic water erosion. And it looks exactly like they teach in school when it comes to water striations, whether it's from glaciers or from water. These are signature traits of water. This is not wind. Yeah. And the fact that all these areas of white blemishes, say in the Richat, are confirmed salt. There's numerous studies. I mean, for example, there is a treatise from 1851 from England and Mauritania that lists a few things. That talks about, one, that abundance of gold. It lists that, let me back up. Salt. They used to export gold out of Mauritania to Europe, and that's one of the locations. And also, gold. It said that prior to the gold rush of North America back in the 1800s, Europe got most of their gold supply from Mauritania as well. Wow. Which is an interesting point, because if that was a site of Atlantis, which was said to be so rich in gold, what an interesting similarity.
Go back to that image again, please, Jamie. What's really fascinating too is the description of Atlantis, of having that opening to the south, and then you see this clear pathway to the south.
Yep.
Everything lines up. The shape of Atlantis, like the concentric circles, the amount of them. Earth to water, the way the representation of it as described,
right.
The mountains to the north, like everything lines up.
And not only that, all that salt is all, if people play around with this on Google Earth, you can check the elevation by using your mouse. All the areas with all the most significant amounts of salt happen to be at the lowest elevations, which I think is corresponding evidence that seawater had settled and later evaporated there. And as you see here, you can see it rips through the entire Sahara. And if you look at their study that's showing the trans-Saharan seaway of 56 to 66 million years ago, it shows that the water blasted to the south, but it does not show it going west over the Richat. So I feel like there was some other event, something separate that happened. And I mean, yeah, these photos are spectacular.
The photos are spectacular, but could you zoom out again, please, Jamie? The thing that's crazy is how clearly it looks like water came over that and washed back.
Oh,
look at the left side of that image. It looks so clearly like massive amounts of water came over there and then pulled back. Like, look at the way it's eroded.
Do you want something that's going to blow your mind? So this area right here. Scroll in, Jamie, and you'll see, we discussed this last time as being water ripples. So remember when Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson were on your show a few years ago, and they were showing you the area of the Missoula floodplains in Montana and Washington.
West Bar,
Yeah.
God, look, it's so clear.
And so what's interesting is that, so I measured these, and there might be some of the slides in there. I'm not totally sure, but yeah, that's white salt. But these...
This is a wild
pictures got great. Well, that's like
amazing.
Taking some recent satellite
amazing.
photos.
God, it's amazing. You can keep digging in like that.
So these ripples, when you pan out, so the ones that Randall had showed you those were something like closer to 300 feet apart and 50 feet high. I've measured these more than 3,000 feet to 6,600 feet in between each ripple and more than 200 feet high.
Wow.
So if these are indeed caused from like ripples like you see on the beach from catastrophic flooding, this is a force of water that is truly, it goes beyond the mind's comprehension. It's something that I don't think we could even understand. But if you pan out, people have to understand that this is a couple hundred miles from one side to the other.
Yeah.
And so this would have been a force of floodwater that I think goes beyond anything we could have thought possible. I think this is why scientists have somehow missed it, because I don't know how to say this, but no one else seems to be talking about this.
Now, the structure that you think is Atlantis, how tall are those concentric rings?
So it is the entire structure from one side to the other is nearly 30 miles, but the interior structure of the concentric circles is 16 miles. And this is one argument that's made against it, is that the size dimensions that Plato had gave are significantly smaller. And so, but I would make two arguments on this. One, this is a 12,000-year-old story, and
Go back to that, please.
I would argue that it is impossible for over 12,000 years to carry down precise translations because of
How off is it from the translations?
Oh, significantly. The entire site would be a small circle inside the middle of this circle. But here's the reason why I think those dimensions are wrong, is because Atlantis was said to be busy all day and all night. And I would compare that to any modern city today, which you could argue would be a population within the millions. So if it was as small as Plato described, it wouldn't be feasible to suggest that millions of people would have lived there. And I'll make one other little point, which is that, because many people posit that it could be in the Atlantic Ocean, like at the Azores, and I think that's a phenomenal argument for that. But if I was to defend the wrist shot, or I would say that if this was a place that was spoken from languages of all over and was said to be a trading hub, I don't think that it would be as feasible to suggest that Atlantis would be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean as opposed to West Africa, which was green at the time. This whole area was connected by a network of rivers, which I should have some slides in there.
Close to the coast. You could get boats in it. You wouldn't have to venture out in the middle of the ocean unless you described in your video. Rivers. You make a very, very compelling argument. Yeah. My question, though, how tall are those circles? Like, how high do those things go?
I want to say 60 feet from... Or 60, actually, no, excuse me. I want to say 100 feet at some of the highest points down to the salt. I'd have to remeasure, but if Jamie, if you go over
Did you go there personally?
No. So I have, in fact, let me give them a shout out. Josh Sigurdsson and David Stig Hansen went there individually. These are some intrepid fellows. It is a gutsy trip. Josh almost died because you have to drive through a minefield to go there. He saw actual skeletons.
He had like an AK pointed at his head.
Yeah.
It's
Really?
a wild ass place. Yeah.
You have to drive through a fucking minefield to get there?
He had balls of steel.
He's an intrepid fellow. Same with David. And to be honest, like, I'd rather fly over it. If someone wants to fly me over it, I'd love to get some great pictures.
What if they shoot at the helicopter?
And that's another thing.
That.
I don't want to trash Mauritania because I've heard from people who have gone there, they met the nicest people they've ever met in their lives.
As long as they're not shooting you, they're nice.
But it's worth mentioning that I know.
Well, there's all the gold there, too. I would imagine they would want to protect that gold.
Which is why they won't let you do ground radar here. So Josh brought out ground radar equipment, and they threaten imprisonment. And apparently this is one of those countries where they will cut off your fingers if you get caught stealing, potentially. And this is a country that it wasn't until the 80s as well as additional law legislation in like 2007 where to abolish slavery, but apparently it's not being enforced. So there are still slaves in Mauritania. So I'm like, when I hear details like this, it makes me just not feel like driving out there.
Do they know that people think that's Atlantis? Are they aware of this?
It's growing. People are now talking about it. People are venturing out there. They have this on their currency, the picture of the wrist shot. Were you going to say
it's the most famous thing? Yeah, well, just the whole term of Atlantis too. We do tend to focus on it being like a single city, a single thing. It was, and I was chatting with Randall about this just last night, and he was saying, there were colonies, there were outposts. They would have had a global kind of outpost all around the world. So it's possible, even likely, that Atlantis existed in various different places, and it's it's almost a term now that you say Atlantis, it gets this connotation to it. It's almost a pseudo archaeological term.
Yeah.
But we
it
thought
wasn't
that
always
about
the case.
Troy as well.
We did. Troy's another one, but
Troy's one until what year was Troy actually physically discovered?
1890, something like that.
Yeah.
Late 1800s, I want to say.
So up
approximately.
until that moment, they thought that Troy was just a myth,
fantasy.
Yeah, it was just fantasy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but people used to take Atlantis a lot more seriously. It was something happened. Like in the 1960s, there was a lot of legitimate scientific work being done on, like in the Azores region, looking at the possibility of subversion and can there be large parts of land that sink. And then something happened where it's like the establishment just turned on it, and it became this pseudo term, and anyone who mentioned it was kind of dismissed and shaken off in the same way that they're treating guys like Hancock and with his ancient Apocalypse series are now.
Yeah.
But I don't know specifically what happened, but it used to be taken a lot more seriously, and there's certainly a lot of evidence coming from prior cultures that something did exist. And I think now we've got a massive body of evidence that suggests our history as a species and as a civilization goes way back, much further than what we've thought about as being our own history since, right up until 2006, we pretty much thought, nope, the last 6,000 years, that's when we stopped being cavemen and became, started building cities and organized societies and things like that. And that whole game
the
has changed now.
gatekeepers of academia, just the stuff that you two gentlemen put on your YouTube pages should open up fields of inquiry. People should be reaching out to you. They should be having you speak at universities. They should be watching your videos. They should be like, oh my God, like look at all this actual evidence, not speculation, not like, look, you're looking at physical geological evidence, physical erosion evidence, and then all the stuff with the structure that lines up exactly with the stories of Atlantis. It's fucking wild.
It's one of these things, like I'm a very open-minded person. I can't say like with 100% certainty. I mean, anything's possible.
Of course.
But I'm like, there's so many similarities that if nothing else, it shouldn't be ignored. The off the West Coast should be drilled and run with some LiDAR to see what's going on underneath that sediment. And not only that, like let's just pretend, okay, Atlantis never existed. The wrist shot's not it. Well, then let's like focus in then on why is this catastrophic water erosion going through the Sahara 60 million years more recently than it was supposed to. There's another image in there, Jamie, that shows where the Trans-Saharan Seaway went, and it does not reflect it going west over the Western Sahara. So I'm like, in the context of climate science, I'm like, this should be discussed. Why is nobody talking about the Sahara was green potentially 4,500 years ago, which is, by the way, the same alleged date as the Great Pyramid's construction in Giza 4,500 years ago. So check this out. As you can see, it does not annotate the water erosion going west over the wrist shot. But as we just showed, it clearly did. And this was based on a 20-year study. Wonderful people did this. I don't know. I have no explanation for why they don't annotate it going west, but it clearly did. And not only that, it went east of Niger along Chad, which, I showed you the water erosion along the volcano. So what I'm suggesting is that either something else separate happened or they just missed something because again, the Sahara is a big place, and they can only search so many places.
When they did this, did they have the sort of satellite imagery that are available today?
No. Well, I can't say no. Satellites were certainly around.
What year was this?
This is like, I want to say 2007 or something. I could be wrong on that. I got to double check that.
Totally would have had satellite.
Yeah. So, but I know that they were doing some boots on the ground stuff.
Maybe they just didn't think to look at that particular area as being maybe they had like a preconceived notion.
That's what I suspect. I don't think they are intentionally not looking at it, but I feel like, when it comes to, you're mentioning like we should be speaking at universities, Joe, the first thing they ever say is like, oh Jimmy, he was a fraud investigator. He's from the corporate world. Like Ben has an awesome story too, by the way, coming out of the corporate world. You got
we could get into that.
Yeah,
so
you got patents with all right, tech guy. We'll get into that. But like, so that's they immediately dismiss. And I want to make an interesting point, which is that
it's so crazy that they're gatekeepers.
Yeah,
the egocentric, ego-minded gatekeepers. Like they don't want anyone to discover something they haven't noticed.
100%. It is totally what they do. It's almost unbelievable. Coming as like an outsider to this, I couldn't be more surprised to see their reactions to anything alternative, because it's like, wait a second, the success of the things that we present, the success of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse show, any true enthusiast of ancient history or geology, this is a win-win for everybody, because it's gaining interest in these unanswered questions, and everybody would stand to gain from it. Like archaeologists, like if it was up to me, they'd be out there digging right now because of this stuff.
But the problem is they have already made these assertions. They've already published papers. They've already written books. And those books would now be disproven, and they would look foolish, and they do not want to look foolish. They're throwing everything at Ancient Apocalypse.
They really are.
Every word in the book. I don't even want to utter it.
Racism.
Yeah.
White supremacists.
And white supremacy.
How is it white supremacy to say that people who lived 12,000 years ago, we have zero idea what color they were. We have zero idea what they looked like. We're literally talking about human beings, fellow human beings, that created some unbelievably magnificent structures that exist today.
Yeah.
To call that, or to somehow or another connect that to racism, like how?
It's ad hominem. The only reason why you would do this, it's one of two things. I've listened to their arguments, and it's either one of two. I'm just going to say it. I'll be bold. They're either really stupid to associate that with racism, or they're doing exactly what I see going for anyone that says something counter to a narrative, which is, we need to cancel this person, shut them up.
Yes.
And I had a friend reach out to me when this show came out, and they Googled, I don't even want to say this, but it has to be said. They Googled Graham Hancock, and there's articles at the top linking him to white supremacy. I'm like, this is, in my mind, that's why they do it, because they want to just shout some doubt on you.
Well, it's trying to generate outrage without addressing the things that he says and addressing his specific arguments.
He's married to an Indian woman.
Everything
about it is fucking dumb.
And he's one of the.
He's the nicest guy in the world.
I know Graham pretty well too. He is. He's one of the most considerate people you ever meet.
He's so nice, and he's just so inquisitive, and he's been so courageous his entire career. And the more time goes on, the more he's validated.
It's
the
true.
More
really?
Yes. I mean, you go back to Fingerprints of the Gods. I read about that in the 90s. I read that book in the 90s, and that's when I got really into his stuff. And back then, if you brought it up, people would go, oh, he's a kook. This is not. But as the internet came about, and as more and more information became available, and then the discovery of Göbekli Tepe just threw the whole thing on its head.
Yeah. He has. I would argue he's done more. Sorry, Ben. Real quick. He's done more for the bringing the topic of the mysteries of lost ancient civilizations, cataclysms, than arguably anyone else on Earth. Because of him, I saw him on your show. I go down the rabbit hole, start looking. I start talking about these things. So it's like everyone should be saying thank you to Graham Hancock. Sorry, Ben.
They're just so scared that he's going to make them look like fools because they wrote these books when they had limited access to information, and they made these very like direct assertions. This is what happened. And they're wrong.
It's a position of power. It's archaeology not being a hard science that does hypothesis, experiment, and result like you can do in things like chemistry, for example. These guys they rise to their positions of powers in academia. They become their whole personal, I think, sense of self is somehow tied up around this position as an expert in this story. And that's all it is. Ultimately, we're trying to interpret the very scant evidence that is history. We're looking through the bones of many civilizations. People have destroyed things, rebuilt them, destroyed them, rebuilt them. You're trying to put that together and evaluate this evidence. And they write the textbooks, and they kind of have that position of power. And when new evidence comes along that I think threatens that's why you get, in some ways, such a strong reaction, because you're almost threatening the person. I think they take it that way, and it's
most certainly,
it's unfortunate.
I'm sure you've seen the original discussion that Graham had with Dr. Robert Schoch when they brought the evidence of the water erosion to the Sphinx. Mm-hmm. And then that archaeologist was laughing, but not really laughing. It was, what evidence do we have of an ancient civilization 11,000 years ago? Well, now we have a lot, fuckface. There's a lot. You know, there's Göbekli Tepe is massive, and then there's another structure that's close to Göbekli Tepe.
Karahan Tepe.
Yeah.
In fact, they're discovering many of them now. It's not only that, the whole story, as we're told it in dynastic Egypt, just doesn't make sense from a number of different perspectives. It's as if they arose out of nowhere, perfect, and then degraded over time. When you think about it, things like the pyramids, I mean, those are the first pyramids ever made, like these massive megalithic stone pyramids that have all of these different elements of sacred geometry and precision and all these different aspects of incredible engineering built into them. That's apparently what they did first. They kept building pyramids after that time.
And they sucked.
They suck.
Yeah,
well, they're
100 of
adobe.
them.
They're made
Yeah.
from mud brick.
Well,
and they fall
don't
apart.
really know. That's what do you got here, Jamie?
Karahan Tepe.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be
look-
there in April.
Look, are you really?
Yeah.
Look at that face. Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
that
look
was
at that face. It's scary. I don't want to. It's right? Doesn't that look scary?
video of yours that I watched today was a video that showed the similarities, not just between pyramids, but between construction methods all over the world. In Japan, I had no idea that they had made the sarcophagus covers in Japan that were exactly the same shape
Right.
as the one, and oddly shaped, exactly the same as the ones they made in Egypt.
And in a place, there is supposed to be zero connection between ancient Japan and ancient Egypt. That's not supposed to exist. And if you compare that sarcophagus work, it's like it looks uncannily similar.
Impossible, almost impossible that two people would come up with the same design.
Right.
Because it's like coming up with, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a good, like, if someone like this lighter, if someone this is an unusually shaped lighter, the way the top pops. If someone just coincidentally, without any internet, came up with this on the other side of the planet, you'd be like, how the fuck? It's so oddly shaped.
Right.
Like the button's in the same place, the lid's in the same place. There's no way.
Right.
That's what it looks like to me. And the fact that it took an enormous amount of effort to make and move and put it into place, because you're talking about incredibly heavy stone.
And hard stone.
Yes.
Like that's the other, people don't appreciate just how hard this igneous stone is that these things are made from. Like granite, granodiorite, cyanite. Like it's harder than steel. Like it's there's 6.57 on the Mohs scale. It's incredible work. Like,
and the fact that these similar construction methods existed in Peru, they existed in Egypt, they
Easter
existed in
Island.
Japan, and
Right.
we don't know how old stone is.
Right.
That's what's really wacky. When we talk about like carbon dating, they're not carbon dating stone.
No.
They really don't know. So
Right.
even when they go back to ancient Egypt and they say, oh, we date the pyramids construction to 2,500 BC, it's a fucking guess.
That's what I think.
It's a guess.
It really is.
It has to be a guess. It
Well-
really can't be anything other than a guess. They can measure organic matter. They can measure stuff that's in between the stones, but we have no idea when that was put there. If something existed for tens of thousands of years before we're dating it, we really wouldn't know. Well, we would have evidence that of course people would still live there. Of course people would still live around them. And we would have evidence that those people had left stuff behind that was a certain age, but we have zero evidence as to how old those things are.
Right.
that's right.
And when I found that out, I was baffled.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I always thought they knew 2,500 BC, rock solid. This is it.
Well, they tie it to the guy, the king. They know when Khufu
Right.
lived, and so they try and tie. And literally, with the Great Pyramid, very little evidence. There's like this big statue of him that they found down in the Valley Temple, nowhere near it. And then there's a glyph on the inside. There's a lot of controversy around that. But there are some of these artifacts they do for that reason, because they date a lot of stuff based on the site that they found it. So if there's organic material at the site that they found it, and I've found it's a kind of like a smoking gun piece in all of this, is all the vases. So are you familiar with the incredible stone vases that they make in Egypt?
Please talk about them.
Yeah, so they there is a collection of these things. They're made from igneous stone. And Jamie, I've got a few pictures of the vases in that vase directory, and they date back. It's what's interesting to me about these is that they're some of the earliest types of artifacts that we find. They stretch back far into what we'd call pre-dynastic time, basically Mesolithic times, right back to even 15,000 years ago. There was a site called Toshka. That was dug up. It's underwater now, but and it was a primitive burial. There was a guy that was curled up in this burial site on the side.
Go back to that, Jamie, the thin card one.
Yeah,
What's going on there?
So this is an example, and these vases display just astonishing aspects of precision and engineering. So this is an example of just how thin this material is. So it's igneous stone. This might be porphyry or something like this. A very, very hard stone, very hard to work, but also brittle when it becomes thin. You can see the giant crystal occlusions, the white marks in it. This stuff becomes brittle, yet it's been worked down to this thinness because this one's been damaged, and you can see how thin that interior wall is. Flinders Petrie is the great Egyptologist, the first guy to really start applying engineering principles from the industrial age to this stuff. He found one, he talks about one in his work that was 1/40th of an inch thick. Wow. A 40th of an inch thick. And the interesting thing about these vases, there's 50,000 plus of them were discovered beneath the step pyramid of Djoser. He collected them all up, and even in the museum that's at Saqqara, they talk about, this is so. I've been down underneath the step pyramid. This is a fragment of one of these vases that I found you can handle down there. And even in the museum there, they talk about, he didn't have them made. These were inherited objects from earlier times. Like they get the concept right. And so these things stretch way back into time. There's pre-dynastic artifacts from pre-dynastic burials. But there's always these sort of arguments, can you do this by hand? Can you not? And so recently, there's been some work done. I've been working with a couple of guys, the son of Christopher Dunn, who wrote some real seminal textbooks on ancient Egyptian technology, his son Alex, and Nick Sierra. They're qualified, professional metrologists. They work for Rolls-Royce in Indianapolis. They make aerospace parts, turbine blades, things like that. They've got their hands on a pre-dynastic Egyptian vase. And for the first time, they've actually been able to scan this thing using a structured light scanner and define the specific elements of precision on it. And it's just astounding. Like this puts the whole concept of can these even remotely been made by hand to bed. Like these things had to have been made on a machine and made with extreme precision, because this vase that is pre-dynastic, this is a picture of the vase here that they found in a private collection. Because I should say, generally archaeologists, Egyptologists, they're not engineers. They're not particularly interested in sort of how things were manufactured. So what they've done is they've taken this and put this in a machine, and it's a structured light scanner. So it creates like a point cloud of different lights, and then you match a geometric shape to it, be that like a flat plane, a cylinder, a sphere, a cone, and then you can perform sort of geometric calculations on it and define things like precision. So if you go back to that, the surface A, the vase lip, right? So this is, you can see down on the bottom, they've created a point cloud of the top of this lip, so the flatness, and they've called this surface A. It's comprised of 3,813 points, and it's within 0.003 of an inch of being basically perfectly flat. But that's
0.003 of an inch.
0.003 of an inch.
And this is over who knows how many thousands of years of erosion and sand and dust and wind.
Exactly. It's at least 5,000 years old. I suspect this could be far older than that. Now, what's interesting, once you start doing this, and if you go to the next one, Jamie, now we're looking at the lip. So you take a cylinder and you basically take 10,000 points plus, and you match the inside, the mouth of the vase to a cylinder. And what you can now measure that against the other surface. So if you think of like the top of it as being like the x-axis, this is now your y-axis. So that first symbol here, the perpendicular symbol, what it's showing is that how perpendicular is this cylinder on its axis relative to the top of the vase, the surface A that's on the top, within 1,000th of an inch.
1,000.
So it's perfectly perpendicular to within 1,000th of an inch of the top of the vase. And then the second reading here shows you how perfectly, what's the circular error, like what's the circularity of it. It's within 13,000ths of an inch of being perfectly circular.
How are you going to do that by hand?
You can't. This is the thing. And if you
literally can't?
No, no one's ever been at you. If you rub two surfaces together, you can make them flat. But when you start looking at the real teller in precision and in these discussions about ancient engineering, it's an easy thing to understand when we talk about 90-degree turns and flat surfaces. But what gets really interesting is when you start talking about one surface in relation to another. And remember, these objects, like the big boxes in the Serapeum that weigh like 70 tons, you've got surfaces, 11 feet apart. It's the relativity of one surface to another. So how flat, how straight is this in relationship to this surface?
Right.
And with this vase, the incredible thing about it is that it's, as you go down it, there's another slide. If you can look at
And you should mention how much this equipment costs real quick.
Well, so these structured light scanners are like $250,000. They're professional. Yeah, this is absolutely a tool that gets used in aerospace quite a bit. So no one's ever really done this type of work. So there's nothing like this approaching. You can't do this with handwork, this type of thing. But if you skip to the next one, so now this is a great example. So what you're doing here is measuring the circularity. Go to the next one, because the lug handles are kind of the really important part of this. It's an interesting thing. So for one thing, it's showing you that, okay, they solved the problem of carving granite. It's made from granite. It's actually made from the same rose granite that the box in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid is.
Yeah, not pottery, just in
not
case someone
pottery.
doesn't understand what this is.
This isn't pottery. People often call it pottery.
Real quick?
Yeah.
when you talk about these measurements,
Yeah.
what kind of measurements can be achieved through ceramic pottery?
Well, ceramic pottery, if you're spinning on a wheel, I'm not even sure. You might be able to get down to tenths of an inch or half, like
But
fractions.
you would never get to thousandths.
Not to
of
a
an inch.
thousandth, no. And this is carved. So this is carved out of stone.
Right.
Hard
but I'm
stone.
just saying, like, if you think about a pottery wheel spinning,
Yeah.
and you think about the precision involved in that, and you look at it, it's beautiful, it seems
Oh, it's
symmetrical, it
beautiful.
seems but nothing
No.
compared to this kind of symmetry.
So to give you an example, so a thousandth of an inch, if you take a sheet of printer paper like this, that's about 7.5 thousandths thick.
Holy shit.
A human hair, 2 to 3 thousandths of an inch.
So it's half
A
the
human hair.
size of a human hair.
Of being perfect.
Of being
within.
perfect.
Yes. So
Holy shit.
that's how precisely aligned the mouth of the vase is. Now, again, we've carved this out of stone, and remember, they don't. Even the Egyptologists don't say that they're not spun, they're not cast and created. They say that the Egyptians, used very primitive tools to make these: pounding stones, chisels, flint chisels.
What did they say in the face of this?
They don't. So they don't
overwhelming
address
data?
it. They don't address the evidence for precision.
Should
This is
hold them down.
Huh?
Should hold them down.
Well, this is what I'm.
Like
this
literally grab them and go, tell me what the fuck is going on.
this work should do a bit of that, because there's
How
always
many
been
of
arguments.
these are there? I mean,
Well-
it's not just one perfect one that you're
No,
talking about.
oh no, this is the only one we've managed to scan so far, and I would love to say that because you can't get your hands on these things. That in general, curators of Egyptology museums aren't interested in their manufacturing or engineering, and they don't gain it. You don't get access to these vases to do it. This one came from
How could they not be interested in that?
I don't know. It blows my mind. So here's an example of like another perfect. I'd love to scan this one. It's one of my favorites. It's like you can see the symmetry inherent in the vase just in the fact that it's sitting on like almost like an eggshell. Like it's so perfect. But what that study is showing, and what that precision that's now been measured is showing, that okay, these were turned on a machine. And not only were they turned on a machine, but when you think about the shape of the vase, it has these lug handles, right, on each side. They're like got little holes through them. Those can't be turned. Those
Right.
You can't. If you think of it spinning and this is being carved by a machine,
Right.
those lug handles can't be turned. You would have to cut out like a round thing around it, and then take another tool and shape the lug handles without turning it. Now, in precision manufacturing, when you introduce another tool, that introduces error, even in our best processes today, and we just don't see that on this vase. Like those lug handles are within 1/1000th of an inch of being perfectly aligned with those other surfaces of the vase. It's that relativity of one section of the vase to another that means A, unquestionably not possible by hand, but B, this has been designed. Like somebody made a model of this, and they had a very sophisticated bit of machinery that must have carved it out.
And when we talk about this machinery, like what's the speculation? I mean, what do they think was used to carve these things? Is there any markings on them that would
Yes.
indicate?
Yeah, there is. So this is a whole other discussion when you get into the depths of this work. So when you look at ancient Egypt and the way that it gets treated, they found tools. And I should say it's very rare to find metal in the ancient world, right? As soon as the Bronze Age starts, any metal, super precious, gets smelted down, turned into tools, weapons, things like that. So it's very rare to find metal in general. But across ancient Egypt, they found a bunch of tools. So they found some, copper chisels, bronze chisels, very primitive stuff, some wooden, squares and plumb bobs, pounding stones, flint chisels. So those are the tools that are found. And in general, it's like the orthodoxy here and the academia will do everything they can to just hammer everything you find into this box and say, these are the tools we've found, so therefore everything's made by these tools. Now, outside of that, there's a whole realm of what I would call machining marks that exist all over these sites in Egypt. There's a place called Abu Sir that's been closed to the public for more than 100 years. You have to get special permission to go there. It's one of my favorite sites. It's an Old Kingdom site, like 5th Dynasty. And all over this site, you find amazing evidence for massive circular saws. You see machining marks. There are these tube drills. I've got like an hour-long documentary just on the tube drills because there's been an argument going on for 150 years about the tube drills. There is evidence for very sophisticated and powerful tools that is etched into these artifacts from the very earliest points in Egypt all over the place. And a lot of these things, they disappear in later periods of time.
Go back to that image, Jamie, that you just had. Look at that.
Yeah, so here's an example. I didn't send you any of the machining marks, but I can show them to you at some point. So you find the tube drills are really interesting because it's a very thin tool, and what they would do, they range in size from like a 1/2 inch up to 9 inches.
And are those plugs that were removed from the stone?
So it's like a hollow tool that gets cut down, and then you snap off the core. And now Flinders Petrie, he was you familiar with Petrie? He was around like late 1800s, early 1900s. I use his work a lot in the stuff that I do because he was the first guy to apply engineering principles to what we saw, which is kind of this meta point that messes with my head a bit, in that it took our civilization up to the industrial age to even be able to put some of this stuff into context. Like anyone else that looked at this stuff before we understood what machining was, what working in this stone was, what it looks like to cut stone with a circular saw, you don't have the context to explain it. So we had to get to the industrial age and develop sort of mass manufacture and engineering for us to even recognize what we're seeing here. Wow. So he found there's a famous core. It's called Petrie's Core Number 7, and it's a drill core from one of these holes. It's in granite, and it's located in the Petrie Museum. And this museum is one that actually allows research appointments, and you can analyze it. And it's been analyzed several times. There's been an argument that's been going on for literally 150 years about this core, because what Petrie found and what Chris Dunn later verified. Yeah, that's Petrie's Core Number 7, exactly right there. That, in fact, might even be Chris Dunn's photo. Those that groove that goes around it, very obvious striations, right? Mm-hmm. So it's been incontrovertibly shown that that's a spiral. It's a spiral. So it's not like just horizontal striation. So if you can imagine the way we do it today, we have tube drills and core drills, it spins really fast, makes lots of little marks. There's been studies done looking at those sort of marks. That's not what we're seeing here. What we see here is a continuous spiral groove of at least 2 points. So it's a twin spiral that runs down the length of the core. Now, from that and analyzing that, you can determine a few things. Things like how fast was this drill, or how quickly was this drill penetrating the granite. And Petrie and Dunn both analyzed it and looked at it. Well, it's about a 1 in 60 rate. So for each, say, 60 inches of horizontal travel, it's going 1 inch into the stone. So imagine that. So if you take a spiral and straighten it out, and you just imagine, all right, 60 inches this way, you're getting 1 inch of vertical travel. That figure is 500 times greater than we can achieve today in terms of how fast it penetrates the granite.
500 times greater.
Now, it doesn't mean it cut quicker. It could have been moving slowly, like it might have been turning slowly.
Right.
But it's penetrating the granite at a rate far greater than what we can achieve with our technology today.
This is why it's so important to bring outside eyes into this, whether it's an aerospace engineer. Like this is, going back to Troy, that was discovered by a businessman. He wasn't an archaeologist. That's something that most people don't know. It's like when you bring an outside set of eyes with different sets of experiences, they'll pick up on things that others wouldn't.
Look at that image, that all the spiral lines around that. That's just amazing.
Yeah, so you can go there, and I intend to do this. I might be in the UK this year, and I intend to do that. It's called the cotton wrap test. You can actually, under a little microscope, run a piece of cotton through that groove. Now they actually took it a step further, and they made a latex molding of it, right? And so then they sent it to Chris Dunn. The Petrie Museum did this, and then he like cut reference holes in it, cut it out, and then geometrically proved basically that this is a spiral groove. Like it starts above the line and ends below the line. He showed that that's it. And what I would love to see happen is we could get this core and then scan it with that structured light scanner, because it will put that stuff to bed. No problem. Like there's, as far as I'm concerned, this is a spiral groove. The case has been closed, but people still argue the point. But it's 100% an indicator of some form of technology that's far away beyond the primitive stuff that we attribute to the dynastic Egyptians. So to me, it's an indicator that, and I don't think the dynastic Egyptians, they don't describe having this type of capability. We've never found any tools from them that can do this type of thing. So I think what we're looking at here with dynastic Egypt is a story. It's a longer timeline. It's a story of inheritance. I think they inherited a lot of artifacts, potentially some architecture, potentially like parts of the pyramids or that type of thing. And then that's where their culture grew from that. I mean, they themselves describe their history as going back nearly 40,000 years. Like it's they themselves look at themselves, they look at them like a legacy culture. This is in the Palermo stone, it's in the Turin papyrus, the priest Manetho talks about it. There's a lot of different, so that actual the yellow image in the center, that's the latex core. No, up to the right. Yeah, that one. That's the latex core, the latex molding of core number 7. But the crazy thing is, too, this is the only core that's really been analysed. Like, these things, they're all over the place. Like, lots of museums have them. I'd love to see a body of work be built up with true analysis of it, because...
Do they all have similar markings on them?
Well, yes. And so you can see the holes on a lot of the sites that seem to have a very clear striation on them. Some of the tubes, the actual drill cores, if you like, seem to have it that way. There were other techniques used. So the argument that how the mainstream archaeologists describe them solving this problem is they had a copper tube and they got sand and they put a rock on top of the tube and a bow drill and they just went back and forth with this. And they did some experiments and grinding works ultimately because sand has little chunks of like quartz and corundum in it, but it takes days and days and days to cut this much.
Right.
And the markings and the machining doesn't look anything like what you see in the ancient examples. And what's more, and what's kind of interesting here is that the drill cores that they found, they're tapered. So they taper in like this. The holes are straight, the cores are tapered. So it means that the tool itself must have had almost like a cone shape. And the thing that, because some people say, well, those lines could have been created when the tool was removed. And I'm like, no. If you think about a tapered tool like this, the second you take any pressure off it, the whole tool removes itself from the surface of the stone. So those marks can't be made by withdrawal of the tool. It's 100% something going on. And Petrie, back in the late 1800s, was scratching his head looking at this stuff, and he goes, there must have been a weight of 2 or 3 tons on one. Like he sort of said it was a jeweled tube of bronze that did this. But he was looking at it. He knew a mystery when he saw it, and he couldn't explain it.
What's the speculation? Like, what's the wildest speculation as to how these things were made?
Well, I'm pretty convinced that there was. There's obviously saws and tube drills that are powered by something. Now, I think it may not just be pure friction. There might be ultrasonics involved. One of the whole interesting things I like about this space is it's like. And this has to do with even like the energy stuff that Randall was talking about that he's coming to talk about as well. There are realms of science that sit outside of our understanding. We'll know more tomorrow, in 10 years, in 1,000 years about science. So I think when we look at some of these things in the past, we should be open-minded enough to consider the possibility that some of the answers may sit outside of our current perspective, because our tendency is to look at it all and try and how would we do it?
Right.
How would
does
our
anybody
technology solve
have
this?
wild speculation that you've entertained?
Yeah, I think there's So one of the topics that often gets mentioned here is like ultrasonic drilling. So having it resonate at a frequency that matches the native frequency of the rock and sort of separating the rock more easily. And that's a technology that we're developing. Like, we do some ultrasonic drilling like this today with jewelry and stuff, and you literally vibrate. You find the correct vibration. You can put like a little star-shaped bit through a stone. They do it in like small work. I've seen lots of examples. And if you turn off the machine, it's like Excalibur stuck in the stone. You can't get that thing out. Like, you need that vibration to go through it. Plasma, you can even go as far as, well, they were softening the stone somehow with some molecular technology. Speculation like that. I would also say that some of these examples of technology and machining extend way up to these massive objects. Like, you have 1,000-ton single-piece objects that also exhibit some of these signs of precision engineering. So you might be talking about some truly giant machines that made them. Giant columns and statues and things like that.
And what do conventional archaeologists say when they're confronted by all of this data? The pottery, the vases, this stuff that you're looking at here. What do they say?
Well, you either just get a denial and they won't address it, and you get dismissed as just being ridiculous pseudo archaeology, fantasy theory type thing, or in the case of the tube drills, for example, they will. And it's a funny story because they will argue that no, it's not spiral. The grooves on that thing aren't spiral, and in fact, in the textbook, this is what Chris Dunn found out. In the textbook where they do try to address the engineering with that tube drill, they took the photo of the tube drill and they just tilted it just a little bit. So when you look at it on the page, the lines look horizontal. It's literally in the textbook.
Oh, they fucked with it in the textbook?
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
They altered the photo because if you admit that tube has a spiral groove on it, now you're admitting that they're cutting into that granite at a ridiculous rate, and you can't do any of that stuff with any of the primitive tools. It has this flow-on effect that just knocks over this house of cards that says all this stuff was built with primitive technology, and our whole concept of the ancient Egyptians is off. Now, I don't think it's... I think the dynastic Egyptians, they used primitive tools. I think they just inherited a lot of stuff that's potentially a lot older. You know, and the proofs in the puddings with these vases, for example, that stuff, those things disappear from dynastic Egypt after the third, fourth dynasty. They don't make them anymore. They make alabaster vases.
Is that a tool?
That's
What is that?
That's a fantastic example of what I would call an out-of-place artifact. It's a hollow tube of lapis lazuli, which, by the way, there's no quarries for lapis in Egypt. The closest one's probably in Afghanistan. Came from Gebel Tariq, found in a pre-dynastic site. It's hollowed. It's perfectly made. This is a very difficult thing to achieve, even with modern machinery. And it's displayed in a cabinet next to what? Bone and beads. Right?
And what is that? What is that supposed to be? That tube?
It's something decorative, I assume. It has a gold sheath, but it's a hollow tube. I actually have pictures of it from the end on, not probably in the ones you have, Jamie, but yeah, hollow tube. It's an out-of-place artifact. Like these things from hard stone, and these are more examples. Rock crystal, obsidian gourds and vases that show just perfect, just very high degrees of sophistication.
You should mention the
pre-dynastic,
the statue faces and the symmetry. How can you possibly do that by hand? This will wow you.
Yeah. So there's a whole category of aspects to the discussion around ancient technology, right? And I have to be kind of careful about what you say, oh, it is or it isn't, because in reality, we really haven't analysed that many artifacts. This vase work that we've done, first one we've actually taken a look at, that core, that's the first one and the only one that's really been analysed. So I characterize something that's beyond the capabilities of these primitive ancient civilizations as being, okay, machining marks, tool marks, like these giant circular saws, tube drills, precision, and there's elements to precision, and one of those is symmetry. And there's been some interesting studies done on the faces of giant statues. One in particular is the face of Ramses. There's a statue at Luxor. They've since put the head back up. It's up now 30 feet in the air on top of the statue, but it used to be on the ground. And again, Chris Dunn was real seminal in this. He went and took a photo, like bang on, like very front on. And then what he did was you take a copy of that photo, you make it 50% transparent, make the original 50% transparent. You take one and you flip it like on that horizontal axis. Then you overlay them, right? So you would see like the left to right. It's like overlaying the left side on the right side. And it's perfect. It's this face here, but I wonder if you can find the picture of Chris Dunn. That's actually
There's your video right there.
Videos there as well, where I get into it.
Website, but that's not that picture you're asking for.
No, it's similar, but it shows other aspects of the same radius of tool being used to cut. But what's interesting about the symmetry? It's perfectly symmetrical, left to right. Now, this isn't a feature in humans. No human is perfectly symmetrical. Different nostrils, different eyeballs. It's also not something that is done in artwork. So, people often say, well, Michelangelo, he carved David. It's a beautiful statue. I've seen it. It's incredible. But it's human. It's not symmetrical. Symmetrical is, you can't achieve that degree of symmetry just by eyeballing it and doing it by hand. And it's also something that's not really human. I think some of these statues almost look a bit inhuman because of that symmetry when they're up there and they're staring at you, because it's mind-blowing to actually go and look at them. But it's the other aspect is the most efficient way to create that would be to say, well, if you were going to design it in a computer, it's like, well, I'm going to create half this face in a program and map it out, and then I'm just going to reverse it and say, well, that's the other half. It's literally the most efficient way to do it, and that's kind of what we're seeing in some of these statues.
Go back to that image, please.
It's virtual perfection.
And what's the explanation for this that modern archaeologists use?
They did it by hand, right?
That's do it by hand. That's literally what they say. You just don't... They're not engineers and construction experts at the end of the day. That's the problem. So it's very difficult to engage them on those specific details. And I've taken many engineers, master stonemasons, stone carvers, construction guys, and a lot of them see it immediately. People that understand what it takes to both work in this material and to work at the scale that some of this stuff is worked in. They see it immediately, and they just dismiss the idea that this was done with literally pounding stones and, copper chisels. It's a funny thing. They insist those things are how they were done, but not once, no one ever has cut a single big slab of granite the size of a refrigerator in half. We've never gone that far. No one's demonstrated that, yep, you can take a copper bar and sand and grind your way through a refrigerator-sized block.
And you're saying copper because we think that they didn't have steel back then.
They didn't. Well, they didn't, and not until later. There's no evidence for it. There's evidence for copper and bronze.
There's no evidence for it when we're talking about
Right.
2500 BC.
Exactly.
Now, if there was some sort of very sophisticated civilization that
Yep.
was tens of thousands of years before that,
Yep.
and they were wiped out, and
Right.
then you're leaving behind these artifacts, and then people are claiming them as their own, and then trying to copy them.
Imitation was a huge part of it, and we even see that. You go to the Egyptian Museum, and there's these beautiful igneous stone vases made of granite, and right next to them, in the same display, because they're found in the same place, there's a rough pottery vase that's not even turned, just put together by hand, and they've painted it with dots to make it look like granite, and it's shaped the same way as the granite vase. That's pure imitation. Like this here. I love this. This is one of my favorite examples. And this is like either first dynasty or pre-dynastic. But yeah, you have a hard igneous stone vessel made with perfection, and right next to what's clearly an imitation of it made from pottery, and they've even dotted it up to make it look like granite.
All the most sophisticated artifacts, pyramids, everything are all the oldest. It gets worse as it goes on, and that's not supposed to make sense. And like when last time I was on with you, Joe, I was trying to articulate a point, which was that there was, a middle kingdom, there was the first kingdom, there was and there was these periods of revolt and revolution and missing history within Egypt, and there's 3 different kingdoms, and one of which was 126 years of lost history, another was over 200 years. And the one point to mention about that is that means that whoever took over and reestablished themselves, there's now no one alive at that period of time that was around prior to whatever it is that reset them, that government or whatever they were.
Yeah.
So if there's 126 years of lost history, no one is now alive to say what was what before that year one of 126 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3,000 years. Like the dynastic Egyptian civilization itself is 3,000 years old. Now, they do trace that back 30+ thousand years. They describe a time, Zep Tepi, when the gods walked the earth. They literally talk about these magical abilities that you could interpret as technology. And then after that, there was the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, these semi-divine mystical beings. And they have a list of kings and rulers that go back into that time. It's only in our interpretation and our archaeologists that really say, well, you know what, that's just myth and legend. And after that, we start Dynasty 1, King 1. That's actually history.
But what is their justification? Like, why do they say that it's just myth and legend? Like, where are they getting this information from?
Well,
why are they making these?
Well,
these
because
assertions?
Civilization can't exist until 6,000 years ago. It says it right here, Joe. Memorize it.
But once they see Göbekli Tepe, don't
Yeah.
they kind of have to
They should
formulate?
They refuse. They're like they say they're primitive.
They say Göbekli Tepe was created by. They changed it, and it literally happened. I saw this argument being made when Michael Sherman was here with Graham and Randall. They say it's made by hunter-gatherers. They literally changed the definition of what it means to be a hunter-gatherer, rather than move that precious date of civilization starting from 6,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago with Göbekli Tepe. And
Yeah.
I think it's ridiculous. Göbekli Tepe, you cannot produce that type of a installation without civilization, right? You just so many things. The specialization of allowing someone to be able to carve, 18-foot pillars that weigh several tons.
Not
with
just that,
high
but
relief.
the fact that these animals on those pillars are 3D.
Yeah.
Meaning you carve out the stone to remove stone so that you have these giant pillars with like a lizard crawling up the side of it, but
Yeah.
the lizard extends out from the stone.
Yeah, high relief.
It's not carved into it. I mean, that's just insane.
Yeah,
As difficult as possible.
And you need,
Yeah.
you need a population base to support the sort of the development of specialization like that. It's as if, to me, it's as if they just think, well, no, these hunter-gatherers, these dudes just want to get around the weekends, get away from the women, go and do some rock, little carving project on the weekend. We'll move some stones over here. And it's not just stone circles. There's buildings and cisterns and quarries. Like there's infrastructure at these sites as well.
Yeah.
And they're finding more and more of them in Turkey. And the fact that it all goes back to that date's just like, look, we should be shifting the date of civilization back. We've shifted back our date as a species.
Yeah.
I mean, fossil record, we were 190,000 years old forever. They found a human jawbone in Morocco. Now we're 300,000 years old. The latest DNA evidence looking at our divergence from a common ancestor with the Neanderthals and studies on teeth morphology put us at around sort of 800 to 900,000 years old, potentially. Like
That's wild.
That's the range of us
Yeah.
as being sitting around here as modern humans on the planet.
That's so much time.
Dude, it goes back to other periods. You think about it, like that's into other periods of warm, more hospitable environments. Like it's beyond. You go through a couple of different glaciation cycles in that time frame, and give us a few warm, sunny days and enough shit to eat, and we're going to solve some friggin' problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Something wild about Göbekli Tepe. How many of those pillars are still buried and not excavated yet? Almost 200?
It's like 5% of it's been excavated.
And they found it by accident in the 90s.
They did.
That's what's crazy. Wasn't it a sheep herder?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pot-bellied hill. Yeah, he found something sticking out of the ground.
What's
and then,
this? Let me kick the dirt away
Ow.
from this thing. And then, what the fuck?
Yeah,
Then all of a
giant.
sudden you find 12,000-year-old massive stone structures
Yeah.
that predate what we think of as history by 6,000 years.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it just finding more and more of it. And
Yeah.
it's funny, Jimmy, you mentioned about an interesting point about the sediment, because I know, and Graham Hancock likes to talk about this too, underwater archaeology, the fact that sea levels have risen
Yes.
300 to 400 feet. One of the challenges with that is exactly that, is that this catastrophic flooding that happened as a result of this violent process that got us to our climate of today and our sea level, is that, there's sediment everywhere. So even if there were cities, there were remains, the Younger Dryas and the cataclysm was so violent and such a savage event that it would have just smashed stuff. And even if there was stuff that's now underwater, it's like buried in sediment. Like it's not like you're going to just take pictures of the ocean floor all around these continents and find lost cities. In a lot of places, this is all going to be buried in sediment and
Right.
smashed into bits.
Yeah,
Like, it's
gravel.
very difficult.
Just complete
Gravel.
smithereens.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they should go looking.
They should go looking, but I mean, just knowing the geological data, knowing that the Younger Dryas impact theory appears to be correct, knowing that there's people like Randall Carlson who have looked at the surface area of North America and shown
Oh, yeah.
these incredible incredible pieces of evidence that there's massive water flooding that went through impossible to understand. Like you can't comprehend the amount of water and the amount of power that would come from that water and just from being impacted by a mile-wide chunk of iron that slams into an ice cap.
It's crazy. The channeled scab is absolutely spectacular. I've done those trips with Randall a bunch of times. It's such an incredible landscape when you put it in that context.
Yeah.
And you're looking at this outflow from these floods like we've never it's these massive big coulees that are 800 foot high, and you're standing on top of about 300 foot of sediment at the bottom, and it's just ripped all this basalt out and then dumped it out into this massive big boulder spree that's also several hundred foot deep, and you've got granite from Canada that's been carried by these floods down here and deposited in these giant icebergs.
It happened over a couple of days.
Yeah, maybe up to a week, but yeah, it was. I really think he's onto something with the, like the major flood. Like, there's so many problems with the Missoula flood. The main theory of lots of little floods that this ice dam reformed, and it's a good topic for Randall. But yeah, I think it definitely it happened in a real short time, because that whole Lake Missoula area where they say was the reformation of an ice dam. That's what they say. It's like, well, this reformed 95 times and these floods happened. We have no evidence for that. And there's nothing that ever supports that theory, least of all hydrodynamics of trying to form an ice dam that's 2,000 feet deep and 6 miles wide. It's ridiculous. Ice dams don't get that big. It can't happen.
And it makes sense if you think about the fact that they
Boom.
believe we got hit by these massive chunks of rock and ice and stone and
Yeah.
iron from space.
Let me ask.
43,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Boom!
Into 2 mile thick ice.
2 mile thick ice. Let me ask you a question. Have you heard of the Carolina Bays?
No.
Okay, so this is a great one, because this ties into that. And this is one of those things that nobody knows about, but it's a feature that's everywhere. And so up and down, if you search for Carolina Bays, Jamie, all up and down the East Coast, it's not just the Carolina, there are literally millions of these geological features. They're literally bays. They're elliptical bays. The whole landscape's littered with them. We started to notice them with the advent of aerial photography, and then when we started doing LiDAR flyovers, we start to see them under everything. Millions of them. We also, that's on the East Coast. Then over in Missoula, we have what's called Missoula rainwater basins. Again, millions of them, all over the landscape.
Yeah, look at that.
Carolina Bays. And they're everywhere. They range in size from pretty small to pretty big, like miles in diameter, and they're all elliptical. They're all like a conic section.
Now, what do they
Look
think?
at that LiDAR one, is really good.
What do they think these are?
So there's been some debate, and one of the mainstream opinions is that they're wind and sand, Aeolian lacustrine solution created. There's none of the experiments along the lines of wind can back this up. The interesting thing about these is that they're all oriented in a specific direction. And what turns out is that there was a study done because a guy went and mapped out thousands of them and lined them up. And it wasn't until he took into account the Coriolis effect, so the spin of the Earth, that all of a sudden all these lines, the orientation of these bays all lined up at around Saginaw Bay, so which would have been buried in ice. So here's the theory that comes out about the Carolina Bays, is that there was a massive impact into the ice. And it basically threw up splash damage of ice boulders the size of baseball stadiums on suborbital trajectories that then created this saturation bombardment and liquefaction of the entire East Coast and over there in Missoula of the entire land. Like it's
And that
absolutely
image,
nuts.
Jamie, in that lower left hand. Oh, I have a laser pointer.
Yeah.
Jimmy gave me a laser pointer.
I brought one.
How's this bad?
The gift that will
Yeah.
keep on giving.
What do I have to do to get?
Just press that button. Oh, yeah, rip off that little
see.
plastic thing.
Just rip out
It's
the,
like a safety. Oh, no, not
just
that.
rip out
Not-
the battery, the little cover.
Here, you can use this one. It's ready to go.
Okay, show me how to.
I gotcha.
take that. Okay, so this one right here.
Whoa, Jesus.
I know, crazy,
It
right?
reflected back and
Yeah.
blinded the shit out of
They
me.
get you?
This is the real deal.
So is that what they look like in real life?
They're more they're more elliptical than that in general. So if you look at the LiDAR imagery, but a lot of them, yeah, and so they're overlapping as well.
Fucking can't see.
Bro, I'm gonna be shooting this thing at airplanes later.
I got one that
Best $18 I've ever spent on Amazon ever.
I got one that'll pop balloons. It's
Really?
so much. Oh, dude, I bought
It'll
a
pop
few
a
years back.
balloon?
Oh yeah. It
fuck?
comes with a little case with safety goggles. You got to put them on.
I learned
That's a
so much
$200
from this show. I learned so much.
I'll bring it.
So these are, what is that in real life? Is that,
So
does
they've-
it actually look like that?
It depends. Some of them are just farmland. Some of them are still lakes. They have bodies of water in them. They
And
mostly show up with LiDAR.
Oh, look at this, Jamie.
There are a few
Look at
spots
this.
that
Jamie's
you
going to Google Earth.
Yeah, you can see them on Google Earth.
Oh, that's there right there?
That's more of a natural lake, but they're literally everywhere and they overlap. The whole landscape's made up of them.
Didn't they find most of them through LiDAR, though?
Yeah,
so a lot of them
LiDAR.
under the
So
sediment.
They started to see them with aerial photography, and then LiDAR, they just turned up everywhere. Under farmland, I wish I didn't send you the photos of the bays with LiDAR. But it's just the crazy story about their creation is that these are splash damage from a cosmic impact into the ice, and they think it may be related to the Younger Dry. So one of the impacts into the ice kicks up massive ice boulders that are coming in at 6 or 7 kilometers per second that take 7 or 8 minutes of these ballistic trajectories to come down from Saginaw Bay and then just all over the East Coast and Missoula, and it would have exterminated anything that lived there. It literally liquefied the ground. The ground would have the earthquakes and the impacts would have turned the ground into quicksand, like we see in the aftermath of earthquakes. You have cars that are half buried in mud. Like it literally liquefies the earth. And it was just a saturation bombardment on the East Coast. And it's people now just, we play golf on them and it's all this stuff. But it's a catastrophic landscape, the entire East Coast.
Which
and
is what
likely
you would
off the coast as well.
So here, this image is what?
Yeah.
This is from
These-
South Carolina's government page talking about it.
Carolina Bays. So you see they're elliptical. They all orient in a certain direction.
And so the conventional explanation is wind?
Wind and basically water. Yeah, but it doesn't, none of the experiments make sense. There's a guy on YouTube, Antonio Zamora's. He's also written a paper on it and a couple of books. But he shows that there's always been a bit of debate about them. But by far the best I think explanation for them is the ice boulder hypothesis. It's crazy to think about it. Like, impact happens over here. 8, 9, 10 minutes later, you just have this rain of just destruction coming from the sky that obliterates the entire coast of the United States.
That's what you'd expect if there's something that hit at a high speed and of course there'd be fallout. Things would get sprayed about. It would make sense to find that if the Younger Dryas climate impact hypothesis is true, there would be something like that.
They've done experiments. Yeah, so they've you shoot like a bullet into ice at an angle and it shows like the shattering of ice and the orientation. So we can step backwards from the bays and look at, okay, what's the energy required for the impact, and at what angle was the impact coming in? And it's something like it would have been probably a mile-wide impactor up at Saginaw Bay that might have ejected that much ice to do that.
We're so vulnerable.
Yeah,
Cosmic
we're in trouble.
Shooting
We are
Gallery.
so vulnerable, and we like to think that this is all permanent. I mean, you think about how ridiculous human beings are. We spend most of our lives accumulating stuff, trying to get status, trying to, fuck as many people as we can and get the biggest house. And meanwhile, there's rocks headed our way that are going 45,000 miles an hour that could exterminate 90% of the population instantaneously and completely erase every little bit of information we've ever accumulated, all the knowledge, all of our history, all of our understanding of physics, mathematics, the astronomy, everything gone. See ya. Goodbye. Welcome to being a fucking ape man again.
Yep.
Welcome to eating whatever the fuck you can get in your mouth and dying when you're 12.
And having people try to steal all that from you.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? And within 3-4 generations, people would be. This is what I love, the ancient Egypt analysis. You would be probably hammering a black rock into a shape like this, like a phone, and dancing around a fire, trying to turn it on. Like if we dance around a fire hard enough, then this black rock will turn on and it'll give me the fucking answer to anything I want. Like it's just we'd be talking about plasma TVs like it's a legend in the past.
I mean, we would have no evidence of any of this stuff.
No.
And one of the weirder things about us is we insist on putting our stuff on hard drives.
Oh, God.
Right? And which is the absolute worst thing. And then there was the Georgia Guidestones. People were like, well, let's blow that shit up. Somebody blew that up.
Something interesting, they still haven't found anyone from that. I find that quite interesting. That
went away.
they called it an act of domestic terrorism. I mean, exploded ordnance on government land, or is public and it's ran by the state. But they don't have anyone. They had a car drive right by it. They have no suspects. I find that really peculiar because there was supposed to be that buried time capsule.
Yeah.
They allegedly dug it up and there was nothing there. I find that interesting.
What's your crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theory?
Okay, here we go. It was created. So this is complicated.
Who made the Georgia Guidestones, by the way? Do we know that?
Some of it's a mystery. Some of it we know.
Pseudonym, right? The
Right.
guy.
It was a gentleman. I made a video about this. Yeah, R.C. Christian, and there was a small group of donors. And they had these written, essentially, laws for if, like, in the event of a cataclysm in human history was to be reset, and this would be a guidance for how we should proceed.
Yeah.
And some people consider it to be very benign. I wasn't a big fan of them because it basically preaches, I would say, communism. It talks about having population control as far as not allowing that there should be societal pressure as well as legal pressure on controlling how many kids people have moving forward and to keep a balance at 500 million. They don't say reduce the population to 500 million. That's where some of the conspiracies come in, is that this is a depopulation agenda. But the conspiracy, to answer your question, some people suspect that what if, because there's a lot of talk today about people wanting to reduce population and, we're destroying the earth, that what if the powers that be that did create them purposely, if they're under that way, if they're under their plan, they'd want to destroy them, remove that evidence, and pretend those guided stones didn't even exist in the first place, and remove that time capsule. This is complete conspiracy. I don't know what I'm talking about, but what I do find interesting.
What is this? Is that the car?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's the most bizarre thing of this whole thing.
Is that a charger?
They destroyed. So as you can see, they caused significant damage. But the very next day, less than 24 hours after this bomb went off, they leveled it. They raised it to the ground because they said it was a safety hazard. But I'm like, this is the middle of a field. They can cordon off with police crime scene tape. And just being an Iraq veteran, like when there was an IED that would go off, they'd have people come out and investigate this. They'd do an investigation. This was a bomb on United States ground, and they leveled it the next day. And I'm like, where's all the forensic teams coming in to try and analyze the explosive evidence? It just seemed really, really. They urgently removed all evidence of this. And that's the part that makes my little conspiracy wheels go, is because, where's the true investigation? Where's the FBI? Where's the ATF? Again, less than a day after that bomb went off, they raised it to the ground. And nothing since. I mean, how have they not found this person?
Why would they raise it to the ground? Why wouldn't they just fix it?
Or maybe it wasn't salvageable. I don't know. What I do know is that they quickly remove that thing. And that's just a little bit weird. Why would you do that? Where's the ATF? Where's all the people out there taking swabs of everything,
If there was a natural disaster that was imminent and it was headed our way and only a few people knew about it, how much do you think they'd tell us?
They wouldn't.
No, yeah.
I wouldn't say a goddamn thing because we would go crazy. We'd wind up looting all the Targets.
That's right.
Yeah,
Target,
first thing,
Target
Walmart.
would be overrun.
Target and Walmart. Smash
I'm going
it
to
the
Kmart.
ground.
I'm going to the last Kmart.
Starbucks.
Real quick, did you hear what Elon Musk said on the Full Send podcast a few months ago?
What?
So there's Full Send, the Nelk Boys, awesome guys, great podcast. Elon Musk was on there, it's like 4 months ago, it has like 15 million views. It's a 3-hour podcast. And at 2 hours and like 53 minutes, they start talking about cataclysms and ice ages. And Elon Musk, this is out of all things that were discussed on the podcast, in my mind, the most interesting part of it all got zero coverage. It's like nobody talked about it, and it's because it's 2 hours and 50 minutes in. But Elon Musk says a couple things within just a few minutes. He says, if you want to go down a deep, deep rabbit hole, look into ice ages and how often they happen. He goes on to say that...
Well, let's listen to this.
Okay.
Listen to
If you
back.
read about ice ages.
Yeah. Really? Like
Yeah,
what?
deep rabbit hole on ice ages.
What's so intriguing about them?
The whole Earth has just been through the whole Earth is just freezing.
Like I said, there's deep rabbit hole on ice ages. Deep rabbit hole.
Where should we
There's
go?
so many.
Wait, there's so many what?
Wikipedia or
Wikipedia.
Encyclopedia of Canada.
Give us like a little
Canada
bit of a tidbit of it.
Yeah, why do you love it?
What I love it. I mean, I think it's just interesting
So interesting. That's
that
crazy.
that how much Earth's climate has changed, and even where the magnetically where the poles are has shifted over time. So, anyway, there's also been times where in the past where our galaxy has like collided with another galaxy. That probably threw things for a bit of a loop at the time.
What, is there like
No.
a conspiracy when it comes to ice ages or anything like that? Or is
Not really, no.
Oh, okay.
When was the last ice age? How long ago was that?
Well, we're technically in sort of an ice age right now, although it depends on what you call an ice age.
What happened to global warming?
Wait, but yeah, how so? Like, what defines an ice age at that point?
global warming's
I
not
said,
like
it's
cool
deep
anymore.
rabbit-
Elon,
it's,
is
it's,
it?
it's a deep rabbit hole.
What do you do when you go down a deep rabbit hole, though? Is it YouTube videos, books, or how do you educate
Wait,
yourself
so
on
it's
this?
like
Go all over
Wikipedia?
the internet and books and clicking around the internet, googling Wikipedia, YouTube, whatever. So Twitter can be interesting. I think there was probably something significant that happened at the in the last ice age, because we don't see any evidence of writing. When I say I'm using ice age in the colloquial term, of like when was it very snowy, and where the glaciers came down far, and where summer was short and winter was very long, and that was about 10,000 years ago. So something happened around that ice age, that because we see no writing. No writing before that ice age, and we start to see writing pop up in multiple places on Earth after that, after the most recent colloquially termed ice age. But like I said, there have been times when Earth has been extremely tropical and where it's been a snowball. But these tend to occur over very long periods of time. The global warming thing we're talking about here.
That's about it. He knows. For such an unbelievably smart individual and as rich and powerful as he is, I look at these topics that we're into: cataclysms, Younger Dryas, lost ancient technology.
Magnetic poles.
That's the one thing. I would
the
like to dive
scary
into
one.
that.
I watched a video on that this morning, the Adam and Eve video.
Oh yeah, the Chan Thomas thing.
Jesus Christ.
That's an interesting one. And
Is that how much of that is agreed upon? That there could be a time where the magnetic poles actually shift.
So this is science. They say that the last one was like 778,000 years ago, and we're like something like 200,000 years overdue. But the Adam and Eve story, the theory of that is that it happens in cycles of 6,500 years, and that it's a 90-degree flip, but 6 days later, or on the 7th day, it corrects itself.
The planet flips, not just
correct. It's a planet flip 90 degree, and that because of it, the Earth essentially does a standstill. The sun will basically stay in the same spot, causing heating like we've never experienced, and that the wind and the waters continue with their momentum. Because essentially the wind travels at approximately 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. So the theory is that when that event happens, it's going to be cataclysmic. And here's the wild thing is that in that document, it says a continental-sized tsunami being 2 miles high. Well, I showed you the Emikusi volcano in Africa in the Sahara, which is at 11,300 feet, that has salt as well as evidence of gastropods, sea life.
That's 2 miles high.
Yes. And I'm like, it would make a lot of sense. Like if you look at the Bible and involving like Revelations and it's saying like
6 days.
6 days on the 7th day, God rested. In that document, it says 6 days things start simmering down a bit, and by day 7 things are starting over new.
So what's the science behind this complete reversal of the magnetic poles?
So real quick, this is the part that sets me off about this is that any article you ever read on this, it makes it crystal clear that this will not be apocalyptic. Maybe we'll potentially have some satellite communication issues that could affect our power grid and telecommunication systems, and that's going to be unfortunate. But don't worry, it's not a doomsday. I'm like, okay, first of all, if the grid goes down, that is doomsday. But number 2, they don't know what they're talking about because they claim that the geomagnetic pole shift is because of the interior, whether it's the iron core or whatever it is, the molten core, does a shift, and because of it, that's why the compass will flip. But I'm like, if you look at the nature of earthquakes, some originate in the crust, others originate in the mantle, in the parts that aren't solid. So I'm like, if you're saying that the interior that is molten does a shift, why on earth would you suggest that it wouldn't cause earthquakes or volcanic activity on the surface? So I feel like every article I ever read on geomagnetic pole shifts, they go out of their way to say, don't worry, it's fine. And I'm like, but yet the evidence shows that it's accelerating. Back in just the 1990s, it was traveling, the North Pole was transitioning at 10 miles a year. Now it's at 40 or almost 40 miles. It's accelerating. And then the Adam and Eve story, it talks about, actually, no, not the Adam and Eve story. There was a documentary on Nova years ago that the evidence shows that when they've studied all the other volcanic rock, for prior known pole shifts, because keep in mind, there's hundreds that are known. This has happened throughout millions and millions of years. This is mainstream science. The poles do flip. But it's not that the Earth flips over. It's that the inside core does, and so your magnetic compass will flip. Like
what causes it?
So whatever that molten core is, it does a shift inside. It allegedly happens in cycles, and we're long overdue. And when it happens, the other theory is that the Earth's shields will be diminished.
Well, definitely. So we know 2 things right now is that the pole is moving. So it's off. I think it's off even the South Pole might be off of Antarctica at this point, like the magnetic south. And then the magnetic field consequently to this movement is weakening. So we know our magnetic field, and that's where a lot of that danger is going to come from is if the magnetic field keeps weakening. Now everything cosmically that happens is going to hit the Earth, and particularly us with our electronics, it's all going to get more easily smashed because the magnetic field is what protects us from solar flares and cosmic radiation and all this stuff. So as the field and the acceleration of that weakening of the field, is accelerating. So it's getting weaker faster. So we seem to be heading towards a unknown or undetermined time where the poles may shift, like the polarity of the Earth will shift, and the compasses.
And
will
are
flip,
there
but we
any
don't know when.
estimates on when this could possibly take place?
According to every article I ever read, like, oh, don't worry, it's probably be another 1,000 years. I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. It's accelerating, and if you look, you don't have to Google this, Jamie. I don't know there's a mountain chain in eastern Oregon where it's the most evidence of a pole shift. That there was a volcano that was active during the shift, and if you take a compass along the volcanic rock, the compass will slowly start to change, and so wherever like pottery or volcanic rock solidifies, that wherever the North Pole is at that time, it's an imprint, and the compass will continue to show that. It's really fun. Take a compass around volcanic rock, and it'll move the compass to wherever the North Pole was then. But here's the interesting part, is that what it shows is that the pole shifts start slow, and then they accelerate to the point where the day that it happens, you could potentially see the compass slowly moving. And then when you go back to this Adam and Eve story talking about the pole shift, they say that the event happens in approximately a quarter of a day, so 6 hours. So it's like it comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, what if, like, I'm into the cosmic impact, that there's unbelievable evidence that definitely happened. But there's other things that happen on Earth, whether it's super volcanoes. What if that's related to pole shifts as well? And the reason why the evidence wouldn't be necessarily that we couldn't find it is because if the Adam and Eve story, if the details discussed in it are accurate, the reason why we're not seeing the evidence of it is because it flips right back and thus masks the evidence that it ever happened. So it's pretty wild.
You guys are freaking me the fuck out, man.
Hey, can you let's just text Elon real quick. He knows. He talks about no writing before 10,000 years, and then he's saying it afterwards, and he's talking about deep rabbit hole. I listened to what he says. He's careful with his words. And I mean, since we know there's been 5 interglacial periods over the last 450,000 years, this is the topic. You want to see something else? President Trump said it too.
What did he say?
He was. I have the video on my laptop. It's only 30 seconds long. If you YouTube Donald Trump on climate scientists, basically they were talking about global warming, and he basically interrupts and says, "It's going to cool first, though, isn't it?" And the scientist is like, "Oh, that's not what the evidence shows." And he kind of laughs. He goes, "I'm not so sure you know that." And I'm like, "Of course he would know." People are like, "Oh, Donald Trump's anti-science. He's stupid." I'm like, he didn't just pull that out of his ass. He was saying
when
something.
he was the president?
Yes, this was just a few years ago. This is probably his last year of his term. I have the clip on my laptop. It's a 30-second clip, or maybe 20 seconds. He said it's going to cool first, though, before, isn't it? And I'm like, I look at what Musk is saying and this evidence of the pole shift. I think that the true data on Earth is that the Earth is cold most of the time. That right now we should be grateful that it's nice and cozy because we can live when it's warm. But I think that the data might indicate that Earth is cold more often than it's hot.
Well, that's what Randall Carlson has said. And what Randall Carlson said that really freaked me out, he goes, global warming's not scary. He goes, global cooling. That's what's really scary. But we're so concerned with our own guilt and impact because of industrialized society and what sort of impact we're having on the climate and the earth and our air, and then there's this narrative that just gets repeated over and over and over again, this fear mongering, and everyone gets freaked out. It's not to say that we aren't polluting, we certainly are. Not to say that we shouldn't improve, we certainly should.
Sure. Yep.
But if the fucking magnetic poles might shift and we might get hit by a giant rock from space, we might have bigger problems.
Yeah,
and we're going to be concentrating on nonsense, which is really par for the course with human beings. We're going to be concentrating on these things that we're really not going to fix over the short term. When something might happen that it makes all of it a moot point.
This is what the doomsday people say. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, that's the analogy is a great one that from my friend George Howard says. It's like we're sitting in a car arguing about what channel the radio's tuned to, but the car's sitting on a train track. Right, and the train's coming eventually because the climate change that we're going to get from catastrophic impact or any of these other events that inject kind of energy in from the exterior system. I mean, it just all of this current discussion pales into nothingness.
And then there's super volcanoes too, which happen all the time. Look about Yellowstone. Yellowstone's overdue. Yellowstone is a continent killer.
Yeah.
I mean, we have no safeguards in place. There's no.
We're lucky that the last essentially 10,000 years, with a couple of little blips, things like Burkle Crater, we've had really calm, pleasant weather for most of it. I mean, that's why our civilization has risen. Because if you look at the temperature record and the swings from cold to even colder and back again, I mean, it's up and down. There was all sorts of nasty things happening, more than 10,000 years ago. And ever since then, it's this pretty straight line. It's the reason that we're a civilization now. And because we think in such short-term time frames, human lifetimes or, even just a couple hundred years, we just ignore that stuff. But, if you extend the timeline out far enough, these things are going to happen again. And we should probably be, a bit more conscious of them. And, that's the threat.
Someone must know. If there's enough smart people, they should be investigating this. I'm like, what does Elon know? What do other people know? Like, some people speculate that the reason for such brazen poor behavior involving spending with the government and the economy and the U.S. dollar and all these things like that. Some speculate, it's totally conspiracy, that like the powers that be know something's coming, and so they're just going to keep things going until then. Because the way things are being run, it makes no sense. Like,
the World Economic Forum is taking place right now at Davos, and Klaus Schwab and George Soros just pulled out of it.
They did.
What do you make of that?
They went to the bunker.
Yeah. They're digging
God.
some pretty big holes in Colorado, and there's a lot of bunkers in New Zealand too that are owned
Yeah?
by billionaires. So-
There's big holes in Colorado.
Oh yeah, I mean that's also the Cheyenne Mountain, and that's where all like the
Google
nuclear
that.
command is and stuff, and they've been from sources unknown. I can also tell you that at some point I've eyeballed this like an RFP, request for proposal, for people to develop basically drone systems. You know that the movie Prometheus, where they
Yeah.
threw the drones
Yeah,
up and they're
yeah,
in
yeah.
that tunnels. There was an RFP for people to develop tech like that because the government was interesting. The premise was that they wanted to be able to fight in underground cities.
Fight.
Yeah, like as in for the military. We want to be able to map terrain and have these drones that can navigate in underground space without GPS and map the environment because it's the combat situation was fighting in underground cities.
Because there's going to be a small population of marauding people, and there's
Potentially.
very little resources, and a small number of humans left alive, and civilization will be thrown into chaos.
Right.
Fun.
Yeah,
Fun.
a lot
Yeah.
of a good time.
So much fun. But let's argue about what gender you should use the restroom.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's people that are exploring that premise, man. They have to be, I think.
Smart
Yeah.
people, top men, as they call it. They must be looking into it. And so, like I brought up on the first time I was on with you, and then Graham Hancock had a whole episode on it, the Cappadocia, underground cities. There's
Darren Kuyu.
many of them, and a lot of them can support tens of thousands of people. That almost to me looks like a doomsday bunker, like an ark of some kind. Like they could house farm animals. They connect to underground rivers that are 15 stories down. That this was sophisticated, and I'm like, that
There's
seems
underground rivers that are 15 stories down.
yeah, they dug right to them. And here's something else. They say that there's zero evidence of any type of cave-ins. So whoever carved this out of the limestone in there, this was sophisticated. Like they did so in a way that it didn't collapse in on itself. And they also must have known that it reached a freshwater source of water down below.
So as long as it doesn't get hit directly,
right.
which you could never predict.
Yeah, you'd be screwed.
Yeah.
Which is where I'd want to be if it happens. I'll
This
just
is wild.
have
Look
it
at
land
this.
on me.
Yeah. Look at there's pictures that show images of it like underground.
Yeah,
and
we've seen those before when
Right.
Graham and Randall were on last. We talked about these and that they'd probably use these for short periods of time, right post impact, before they came back to the surface again. So they weathered the storm and then came back above, and that they had gotten accustomed to this, which
Nice
is
of them.
just really wild, man. So this is in Colorado. They're in all over the place.
Jamie, you
11
should
different
Google
cities.
the Cheyenne
Do you want
bunker
to live
system.
though? If everything goes sideways, completely back to caveman life, do you really want to make it through that?
Yes, I've seen enough television shows and
Yeah.
movies to know that it's a lot of fun. I'm gonna. I'm a prepper. I have my things in place to be safe, and I would, if shit really hit the fan, I'd want to look after those who are still around. Like I don't know, maybe it'd be miserable and I'd be eaten alive by cannibals.
How many bullets do you have saved up?
I won't answer that. Ask me after the program. Plenty.
Okay.
Plenty. I was a soldier. All right, so you need thousands. Because
you need a lot.
You need
yeah,
a lot.
thousands. Because
need-
people don't realize. They hear like, 1,000 rounds. That's scary. Like if you're
Shut
just doing
the
target
fuck
practicing,
up,
you
yeah.
could go through 100 rounds in minutes.
Yeah.
So you would need a bunch, and you'd want a variety of calibers, and you'd want a bunch of each one of those calibers. Because if you get to a point where you run low, you want to be able to go scavenging. And you would want a variety of weapons that can house different calibers. You'd want a
Yeah.
shotgun. You'd want the 5.56. You'd want probably a 9mm because it's the most abundant. And Ruger 1022 long rifle. You'd want it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people coming at you though too, that's the thing. Like I've got a few acres, and you run through the scenarios and stuff like that. The people that are going to come at you from the cities and from those desolate areas, like they're the winners of that competition. They're going to be the most savage,
Yeah.
crazy MFers that have been eating everybody else
Yeah.
and taking all their shit. So
Fun.
you just got to be.
And then how
Yeah.
long before we start figuring out phones again after that? How many thousands of years before? That's what's really crazy to think of. If things get knocked into the Stone Age, like if you go back to the sophistication of ancient Egypt and you think about what the civilization could have been like. I mean, you're just speculating. You're just trying to just imagine how they could have moved these 500-ton stone blocks 500 miles. You're putting all these things into your mind. And then say, how long does it take to get from that, if you knock back into barbarians, how long does it take to get from that to where we are now?
Well, evidence would suggest something like 6,000 years.
Which
because
is wild.
It
'cause you
is,
think about
yeah.
like But if you think about how absolutely fucking ruthless people were 2,000 years ago, doesn't it kind of make sense that those are the ones that made it through, and then it took a long time before they calmed the fuck down?
Right.
So if you go back to, whatever it was, the sophistication level that people were at when they built ancient Egypt, let's just speculate that it was 20,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And you think about how much they had to endure to get to that point, and how much they had to. I mean, there's real evidence, and if you especially pay attention to the work of people like Steven Pinker, that over time there's been less violence, less crime, less everything. Like civilization has gotten better. We are calming down from now versus the way we were 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. Things are moving in the correct direction. But how long does it take before you have this level of sophistication that allows you to get to the pyramids? And then we're nowhere near that now. So even on the most conservative speculation that the Great Pyramid is only 4,500 years ago, we're not even anywhere near that now. We're nowhere near the level of sophistication that it took them to build. And we're just guessing as to what kind of technology they had available to them. And as you pointed out, with these vases and with just the alignment to the constellations, the sophistication that's involved in the construction to get stones that are tons of stone that you can't even get a razor blade in between. Like, what the fuck was going on?
Here's the fun thing to entertain is about moving the stone. So all that black granite that came from
500 miles away.
Yeah, but the ones that came from the eastern part of Egypt.
Oh, the Wadi Hammamet quarry that's in the east, in the mountains.
In the mountains of.
It's nowhere near the Nile.
Right, and so they would have had
it underground.
You'd have to go up and down mountains to move these things that were tens of tons, like off cliffs. And because like the narrative is like, oh well, they would have brought these stones up the Nile,
right?
Well, there's stones out there that are on the other side of the Nile in the mountains. So how did they bring those?
There's enormous stones.
Huge.
Enormous.
Well, there's 1,000-ton stones.
There's evidence. There's multiple statues that I can show you pictures of that there were single piece statues. So you have the unfinished obelisk in the quarry. That's 1,200 tons. But then you have at least 3 or 4 finished statues that were 1,000 tons, single piece granite. And one of them's in a place called Tanis, which is way up in the north in the delta. That's more than 1,000 miles from where that stone came from. And then moving that thing, I mean, it's 1,000. It was around 1,000 tons finished, single piece granite. So moving it, you may be at 1,500 tons or more. Like moving that. There's a quarry in Egypt. I think it's called the Minya Quarry, which has these blocks. They're still attached where they've cut these big blocks out, and there's like an image of what looks like a giant pharaoh that's been carved on top of it. They're made from limestone. Now, maybe they were never intended to be blocks, or maybe they were never intended to be finished, but if you assume they're blocks, these 2 blocks weigh, I think it's 3,500 and 5,000 tons a piece, based on the density of limestone in that region. Like, they're not disconnected, but that's the scale. We know there's objects up to like 1,200 tons, but the fact that they moved them 1,000 miles. And we have examples. There's a stone called the Russian Thunderstone. Have you heard of this?
No.
So like in the 1700s, they took a big lump of, I think it's granite or something like that, from Finland, and they shipped it to St. Petersburg, and they carved it into a statue. It's still there today. It's the Thunderstone. It's an edifice. It weighed. That's it now. Yeah, that's the finished one. This image here is the right one. Yeah. So this is how they did it in the 1700s, the Thunderstone. And they moved it around 100, 150 meters a day. It took them forever. And the only way they did this was by basically sinking giant logs into the ground to give them a leverage point for these capstans. And they'd move a system of rails, big steel rails with steel ball bearings behind it. It weighed about 1,500 tons. And just over a period of just very slow grinding and turning with capstans and pulleys and these steel tracks, they move at about 150 meters a day. It took them forever. And in order to get that thing across the water from Finland, they had to construct a giant barge, like a huge barge. And on each side of the barge, they would tie up 3 warships just to try and keep it stable. It's about the same size, same mass as the obelisk that's sitting in this mountainous quarry in Egypt, in Aswan. It's still in the ground. It's like 1,200 tons of granite. and you're expected to believe that they somehow are going to lift this thing up out of a quarry over these like basically big hills and mountains of granite and put it on a little ship that's narrowed in this they call it the harbour there, and it's this tiny little space. I'm like, you're absolutely delusional if you think this was a simple task that could be achieved with primitive methods, and then ship that thing 1,000 miles somewhere. It's
when you speculate, when you sit around by yourself, because you've thought about this a lot. How the fuck do you think they did this?
Look, I
take a wild
ass guess. I think there's connections possibly to gravity manipulation. I think anti-gravity had to play a part in moving some of this stuff. I actually think there's some connections to some of the work that's being done with this plasmoid implosion technology, the stuff that Randall's been looking into that's coming back to talk a little bit about. The relationship and the sacred geometry aspects of that are similar to the things that we see in some of these cultures in the past. So that may potentially have something to do with the methods that were used in the past. But I'm convinced it was a form of advanced technology. Now, whether it's our form of technology, because let's face it, we can do things like that today, but it takes hydraulics and diesel powers and cranes and all that stuff. They may have had an entirely different avenue of tech, and that you open up into the realm of resonance and acoustics and anti-gravity. I think resonance in particular might have played a strong role, because that's certainly a feature that you see in some of these older structures, whether it's an accident or not, but some of them are incredibly resonant. The Great Pyramid generates a tone just on its own that comes from the earth in there.
It generates a tone.
It does. It generates a low tone. It's basically
you
coming
can
from
hear
the
it,
earth.
or is it?
If you're quiet enough, you can, but it's certainly been picked up in a whole number of different experiments where they're measuring the tone. It does. The whole structure does generate a low tone. It's an interesting thing. A lot of these places that typically have a connection to underground water as well. Like we know there's water beneath the Giza Plateau. Places like the Corsetti in Peru, which is also a giant megalithic building. There's an underwater river near there. We always see some form of flowing water associated with it. Whether or not that has something to do with it, I don't know. But it's just in that realm of, I think it's the answers lay in realms of science that are outside of our current understanding, that we should be approaching with an open mind, because we might ultimately learn something from it if we do. Instead of just dismissing it, putting it in a box and said, you know what, we're superior to every civilization that's lived before.
Right.
They're primitive. They did it with primitive methods.
Right.
Done.
Right.
All things are a frequency. All things operate on resonance. And by the way, a quick little bizarre similarity when you're mentioning anti-gravity, that Dr. Chan Thomas, who wrote the Adam and Eve story, he was researching anti-gravity for McDonnell Douglas back in the 60s.
Listen, so Jamie, put that back up, please. A recent study published on Ancient Origins website claims that the ancient Egyptians benefited from the sound in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza and relied on the discovery of a dead end in the rock inside the pyramid room as a tube of acoustic resonance that generates ultrasonic waves at a base frequency within 5 hertz. This raises the questions of the importance of ultrasound for the ancients, and can we find the use of sound waves between ancient cultures elsewhere in the world? Wow.
Yeah, all the boxes too. The Serapeum is an incredible site that houses like 25 of the biggest stone boxes you'll ever see. It's this one spot, and they're the biggest ones. They're like, some of them are up to like 70 tons with their lids 30 tons. And I've been there with some people that have been measuring like the frequency resonance range inside there. So at what range are you generating standing waves? And they all seem to have a very similar resonance tone to them. So it's an interesting experiment. Like you can stand inside a water tank or a concrete room and find a resonance. But it's interesting to go and actually analyze those aspects of these ancient structures and to speculate, maybe has this got anything to do with what they were made for? Because these are giant precision-made boxes made from syenite and granite that are perfectly flat and square, and they're just massively solid. They went to tremendous effort to remove imperfections from the stone, no cracks, almost like they didn't want the damn things to shake apart or vibrate.
Well, it's just the sheer scale of them. Like it flies in the face of logic. Like the actual archaeologists that want to lock this down and try to come up with some sort of a conventional reason and, some sort of an explanation that we can all get behind. Oh, they used pulleys and pushed them on logs. Like, shut the fuck up. Yeah. Just shut the fuck up. What you're saying doesn't even make any goddamn sense. It's way more likely that there was incredibly sophisticated technology that existed, and it's way more likely, in face of the evidence of the Younger Dryas impact theory, that shit was wiped out. And that we're talking about a really advanced civilization that lived a long time ago, that's more advanced than we are today, but moved in a different direction. Like we moved in the direction of combustion engines and electronics, and they moved in some other direction, but achieved maybe many thousands of years more sophistication in that direction than we have with our internal combustion engines and electricity and all the shit that we use.
And it's important for people to understand that these primitive methods that are suggested and pushed very hard by the, quote, mainstream, they don't test any of these. Like, show me them moving, 1,000-ton stone on logs. Let's see that. They don't show, they've never cut one single box, like you said, in half, or even completed one single average-sized box, or any box. And when I say box, I'm talking about a stone block with the primitive methods.
Well, you have shown that they've moved that 1,000-ton stone.
Right.
The Thunderstone, yeah. But there's no, again, they weren't using
but it's
railway
not
tracks and ball
nearly
bearings.
And a ball bearings.
Sophisticated, but also the way it's constructed, it's just a rock. It's not like this amazing obelisk that's carved out of a mountain 1,000 miles away. It's not. There's nothing like that.
Right.
There's also no evidence for it in dynastic Egypt. That's the other thing. They can't. The earliest parts of, look, the crazy thing about it is in the Old Kingdom, the mainstream archaeologists, there's some disagreement on this, but in general, they don't grant them the ability to even quarry granite. They say that in the Old Kingdom they couldn't quarry granite. They made all of their granite artifacts from surface granite. It's the craziest thing. No wheel, no use of the wheel. Never in the Egyptian civilization did they grant them the use of the pulley. It was literally human horsepower, ropes, levers, and wooden sleds. That's it. The Romans came along and the Greeks, and they started using pulleys and force multipliers and stuff like that, but there's no evidence for that in the dynastic Egyptian civilization.
Have you ever had a conversation with all the information that you have at your disposal, like right off the top of your head? Have you ever had a conversation with a conventional archaeologist that wants to argue this with you?
On email a couple times, but not in life.
What do they say on email?
It's a lot of it is.
I want to keep my job. That's what they say.
I think there's a bit of that.
If you read my textbook, it has all the answers.
Shit. I shouldn't be an expert, but fuck you. Yeah. I bought a BMW, you piece of shit. You're trying to take it from me.
I'm tenured.
Yeah, I'm tenured.
They say, like, we know how they did it because they talk about it. So, for example, with the giant statues, right, there's a scene on a wall. It's called the Djibouti Hotep image. And it shows the Egyptians, it's all, you see these dudes in profile. It's an Egyptian drawing. Definitely dynastics made the drawing. And there's 156 dudes when you count them all up, and they're pulling a statue that's tied to a wooden sled. Now, we know this statue, there's parts of it still exist. First, it's alabaster. It's not granite. Second, it weighs about 56 tons. That's fine. And you're dragging it on a wooden sled. You can't use that to explain how you move a 1,000-ton statue. It's not like a sliding scale of difficulty. There's a curve to it. Like you can move. I do grant them the ability to use primitive methods to move stuff up to like 100, 150 tons. But once you start getting to 400, 600, 1,000 tons, material failure, wood's not an issue. That literally sleds would just be crushed or driven into the ground. There's an absolute scale of difficulty that gets applied to these massive objects. And I think
what are they using to cut these things out of the stone?
Well, that's a whole other mystery, particularly in the quarry. We can see different technologies and tool marks. We know, and this is funny because in the New Kingdom, the 19th dynasty, there's Ramses the Great, the greatest pharaoh of all time, right? He was quarrying granite from the Middle Pyramid for his own projects. He was taking the granite casing blocks, and the way they did it, and the way that they still do it to some extent, is they would hammer out with a flint chisel or even with steel. You hammer away, you make a little groove in the granite, you smash wood into it, you make all these grooves, you wet the wood, and you split the stone, right? You hammer at it with chisels, you wet the wood, all this pressure gets on it, and your object is to split a piece of stone, crack it off, and then I take that piece of stone. It fails all the time, and you see this mark all over the place. You see it in the quarry. You can even see later examples of these chisel marks where they've gotten big chisels, and this might have even been like hundreds of years ago, or not Egyptian civilization, but like the Persian civilization that lived there. And then at the quarry, you have these scoop marks. Like you have this whole other technology that exists where it's like they've scooped away at the granite with an ice cream scoop, and it's gone. It's under. There's a place where you can get in under a piece of stone. Look, they'll tell you that if this skull was it's a pounding stone of dolerite about that big, and they reckon they were doing this with it, which is, it doesn't make sense at about 15 different levels that I do go through in autistic detail in one of these videos. But these scoop marks extend to like the underside of rocks where you're pounding up, and it doesn't make sense. None of this fits the evidence that gets presented, and there's something else at work here. Like there's some other technology that's been used to remove this granite at a rapid rate. Like the scoop mark in the obelisk it's a whole other mystery, but we see it also on other bits of unfinished stone. You see scoop marks on some of the blocks on the third pyramid that are unfinished. You see them at the Assyrion, which is a massive underground granite structure that's at the Temple of Seti I with granite blocks that weigh like 90 tons.
When we were in Egypt together and we're at Aswan, they actually have a granite block with these dolerite hammers that are, round dolerite black stones that are like 8-10 pounds a pop, and you're allowed to bang away at it. I have video of one of my videos on YouTube. It's me doing it, and if you ever take an 8 to 10 pound weight and start banging across, first of all, it feels like you're going to get arthritis within a few minutes. And you see that you're only chipping away particles of dust. It is the least feasible explanation ever. And anyone that simply picks up one of these dolerite hammers and bangs away on a piece of granite themselves will see that it's nonsense. And not only that, those scoop marks that you mentioned, I don't know, Jamie, if you're able to type in Aswan unfinished obelisk, and you see these scoops, they're symmetrical. It doesn't make sense that would be done by handwork. See, that's what we're talking about. And that's in rose granite. That's as hard as a rock, so to speak.
I'm having a hard time understanding how that's even possible.
It looks like it was sandblasted, if you know the truth.
It's something that's scooping the granite out. You actually have these test pits as well, like these pits that go down like 15, 20 feet.
Size of that obelisk.
You have these holes around the side of it where they call them test pits because what you want to do, and this gets back to my comment about the ability to quarry granite, is the quality of granite that it takes to take an object like that, or like it's actually from a guy that went on my tour. The quality of granite that it takes to make large objects like that, and a lot of the quality of granite that we see on the Giza Plateau, you're talking 30 feet.
There's a test pit.
Yeah, that's a test pit. They're like 30 feet inside a granite mountain. None of that. You don't get this quality of granite at the surface level with just granite pieces lying around. And you can go to Giza today, 4th dynasty, and look at the blocks of granite that were hanging off the Valley Temple or the Pyramid Temple, and they're huge crystal occlusions in them. Like, this stuff came from the core of Granite Mountains. You can't say that the dynastic and the Old Kingdom guys didn't have the ability to quarry granite. Maybe they didn't, but whoever made those granite blocks sure as hell did, because that's where it comes from.
Real quick, this image right down here, that black rock is the dolerite hammer, and when Ben was just mentioning from underneath these scoop marks. So they wanted to claim that that's how they did it, that they were banging away with this rock basically upwards.
Well, yeah, you actually there's a consistent line. So on the wall behind where we're standing, it's like 20 feet high, and you'll see a horizontal ridge that runs all the way down that line underneath and then up underneath the other piece of rock. It's like this consistent groove.
This is exactly what I did.
He's banging on it with a dolerite pounder.
Nothing about this is fun.
And are they trying to say that this is how they did it? Is that what
yes, they make you watch a video, Joe.
They indoctrinate you at this site. It's the one site where they sit you down and make you watch a video before you're allowed to go out and look at the site.
Like 10, 12 minutes.
Yeah, you got to sit there.
They make you watch it?
Yeah. There's a video that says, this is how they did it. It was incredible. And
they're insistent. And what's wild is that if you just do it, when you do something yourself, you realize just like, that's not, I don't know how they did it, but it wasn't this. There we go. I filmed this. These are wonderful gentlemen that traveled with us to Egypt back in November.
A couple of engineers there.
Yeah. Yep.
So it is possible to do that with the stone, but not feasible, and certainly not on the scale of those obelisks.
So that's right. There's been some tests that have been done, and I get into it, and I think it's something like, I got to say about 70 cubic centimeters or something like that you can remove with that method over a solid hour. And I think it's either 50 or 70, but put it this way, it's 3/4 the volume of a golf ball, or 2/5 the volume of a chicken egg. Like, that's how much material you can remove in an hour by just non-stop pounding of granite dust. That's the best estimate we have. So what you got to imagine is that entire trench around this obelisk. Bear in mind the trench is only 2/3 as deep as it needs to be to remove a square section. But if you filled that whole thing up with golf balls and added another 25%, that's the number of hours it might take to do.
Go back to that past image.
With that method.
Is the idea that obelisk was left there because of the crack?
Yeah. It developed, supposedly what they tell you is it developed a crack across the center, and they left it there. Now, I think the crack could be the result of later quarrying attempts. When they found this, it was utterly buried. Like, There was one small section of it poking out, but the rest of it at the bottom here was like under 9 meters of rubble, and there were other big quarried blocks. I actually think this could have been here long. I think the Egyptians were using the quarry, but I think this object could have been. They just poured stuff onto it. It just was at the oldest part of the quarry.
And what's the wackiest explanation for these scoop marks?
Wackiest? I mean,
yeah, not worried whatsoever about people's interpretation of you and your ability to discern reality. Like what?
It's some sort of molecular softening tool that just comes in and scoops it out. Like somehow it gets between the
molecular softening tool.
Like can soften the stone, can change the molecular bonds beneath the stone because it's made up of all these granites, like a composite material made up of a bunch of different types of hornblende and crystal quartz and a bunch of stuff like that, and then just being able to somehow scoop it out. I don't know. It's as if it looks that way when you look at it. Like you've got to think it's either some sonic tool. There's something going on that is enabling them to scoop that material out of there in an effortless fashion. These scoops in places, it's almost as if they articulate. Like we see in places, a recent observation we made, they're not just straight down, but they bend. So imagine a backhoe arm. It's digging here, and it does this. And you see that in some of these scoops. There's an articulation to these lines. So maybe there was a tool that was anchored, and it almost looks like it had a very flexible tip, but it was some rotating tool that just chewed out this stone. And that's where Chris Dunn goes with it is, there may be some sort of rotating tool. The interesting thing about the quarry also is that there is drawings on the wall of the quarry where there's all these scoop marks of these ostriches, and it matches pre-dynastic drawings. So it's almost as if there were people in that quarry making paintings on earlier done scoop marks before the dynastic Egyptian civilization even started. So I think that scoop mark stuff is absolutely a part of this ancient lost civilization. There was and it's one of their working areas. There's a tremendous value in seeing unfinished work because we get to have a little bit of insight into, how did this tool potentially function? Yeah. How did it work? But you have to have an open mind to kind of look at it that way. We see the same thing on a couple of objects that are unfinished. There's some incontrovertible evidence for machining and things like that in other objects.
It hurts my brain. Yeah. It really does, because you start thinking, like, what happened? Like, what are we talking about? Like, what kind of technology was available then? Like, when you think about a completely different branch of technology that was achieved 20,000 years ago or whatever it was, you really, there's nothing there. Like, you're just spinning your wheels, just guessing.
Right. Speaking of technology, Jamie, you should Google the Khufu ship, because the largest vessel that's ever been found from ancient Egypt is
a canoe,
basically. And now, and there's no other depictions. Now, no one's suggesting that this boat was used to tug and move around large stones. But it's worth mentioning that of all the descriptions that you see, or inscriptions, excuse me, this 140-foot-long boat is the largest boat ever found.
That's a bullshit boat, too, by the way.
I've said it before, and I feel bad, but it's a shitbox. In comparison,
look at it. It is a total shitbox. It's such a bad design. Like, look at how low it has. Very little depth in the water, so it will have very little stability. And then it's also top heavy. It's like driving around in a fucking Sprinter van on a racetrack.
Top right over.
Yeah, any wave at all is tipping that bullshit boat over.
Yeah. And they found this right next to the pyramid, by the way.
Yeah,
which is pretty fun.
And you get the same thing here. It's like there is a wall scene at Saqqara where they show a very small column on a boat. Like it's a column that barely comes up to a guy's knees, and it's on a boat. It shows them shipping a small column, and they go,
click on that one by your cursor, Jamie. No, the one above it, to the left, right there. Above it and to the left.
You got to use the laser pointer.
That one, yeah, should have. Imagine taking your kids on that.
You wouldn't.
Kids,
You'd be irresponsible.
We're gonna go out into the ocean on that.
It's like I don't know if that's an ocean boat.
Your kids would be taken from
whatever. Even a river. Fuck out of here.
Yeah. That's for
Everyone's
like a pond.
Gonna die.
That's for a pond.
Yeah.
That's a swan boat.
Is there any evidence they even have life preservers back then? Did they have a vest?
Didn't matter because they had the hippos and crocodiles to take care of
it. Oh, Jesus, hippos and crocs. I forgot about those.
But that's the point. The point that's significant in this is that is the largest boat that they've ever found. And my point is that like if they're going to claim that they were moving, 100-ton stone blocks on barges, I just want to iterate that they've never found one, and there was no inscription that shows anything large enough that would have done it.
Right. Right, and there's also no inscriptions at all of the constructions of the pyramids.
That's right.
Zero.
Yeah. Well, so there is, but not the big ones. There's a tomb of the nobles that's over near on the west bank of the Nile at Luxor, but it shows them literally making mud bricks and building a mud brick pyramid.
Mud
Bricks, which is they made a lot of mud brick pyramids.
Yeah.
But later.
Well, there was one person at one point in time that was speculating that the pyramids were made with concrete and that they had devised some sort of a way to make concrete out of granite.
The geopolymer theory drives me nuts on a daily basis.
But it seems like total horseshit.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. There's it's an
especially since they know the quarries.
Quarry's right there.
There's literally holes in the ground that match the objects that we have. There's behind the middle pyramid is the middle pyramid. They cut it out of a hill, like they cut it into a hill. It's crazy. Like they had to cut down 40 feet at the back and put these massive tiles in at the front. They plopped a pyramid on it for some reason. But at the back in that area where they cut the wall down, it's a quarry. You literally see where that's where they cut big blocks of limestone off. The little stubs from the blocks are still there. I mean, we have quarries.
And not only that, all the blocks are different sizes. They're not one-offs.
Yeah.
So if you were literally filling in geopolymer, you would have a lot that are the same size. You would have you'd be filling it. And so since they're all different sizes, it's like that's not what you would have if they were filling.
What is the speculation as to why they're different sizes? Like why did they do that? Like one of the cool things that you showed in one of your videos, which shows the similarities between the construction methods of ancient Japan and Peru and Egypt, is that so many of these stones, they're like these odd shapes that like jigsaw puzzles, and they're fit in perfectly.
Polygonal.
Yeah,
they fit in. Oh, don't worry, that's just a coincidence. These polygonal walls that are found in multiple continents around the world. The fact that there's pyramids on 5 continents around the world. They say it's a coincidence. This is a natural progression of civilization. That a pyramid's like, come on, kids with blocks will make a pyramid.
Makes sense, which is why we make them today.
Right, but if you look at comparisons of the Indonesia pyramids and the ones in Central America and Mexico, like they have similarities of like the strip steps that go up the middle of it. I use the analogy of like skyscrapers, that we have skyscrapers in any major city around the world, and they're all the same based on that, you have steel and concrete and glass, but they're all different. You'd have a different architect here, and they look a little different, but it's still the same thing. But is it really feasible to say, or is it a coincidence that they just happen to start building pyramids on multiple continents around the world, or these polygonal walls that are, whether it's from Peru, Egypt, places in Italy, Greece. There's a pyramid in Greece. I don't know if you saw that in the video.
Yeah, let's pull up your video. Tell Jamie what that video is, just so we can see some of the images that compare these polygonal walls. Yeah. If I was Elon Musk, you know what I would do? I'd hire someone to make a pyramid. I'm like, let me see if you can do
Build
it.
one. Yeah.
Who's the best motherfuckers around?
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw $1 billion at this project. I bought Twitter for 44.
Might as well put $1 billion into it.
Let's make me a pyramid, bitch.
It's got to do it. It's got to make it as accurate as the. As the
or I want my
pyramid
fucking money back. Shit better line up.
Yep. I think it'd be a wonderful. By the way, that Joe tweeted it this morning, so it'll be the first one they tweeted. Makes it easy to find.
I was tweeting it when I was watching. I was like, people need to watch this. This is nuts.
I appreciate that. And what was I going to say? I had something.
South American polygonal walls. There as well. I mean, it's literally the most difficult way to do it. That's the crazy thing. Is like this is not how you solve the building a wall problem. Like if you say they got to it for a different, just independently, like making these complex polygonal walls, that's not how you solve that problem.
Is there any speculation to what the advantage of polygonal walls would
earthquakes?
be?
Well,
earthquakes.
They say that it's definitely true. Like, so yes, you don't have a single line of vector of force, so it won't tip over. But this is where I get crazy about things like the Giza Plateau. You have both. You have polygonal walls that are made like that at Giza from the 4th dynasty. And then you also have much more regular construction from smaller limestone blocks, also at the 4th dynasty, that at Giza that are still standing. It's like they've all been through earthquakes. Both types are still here. I mean, it's difficult to say that, they just made it that way to make it earthquake-proof. I'm like, half the shit here is still standing up. Like, it went through earthquakes. It's fine.
So here you see one from Egypt, one from, go back? One from Mexico
Cambodia.
And one from Cambodia. And what is the explanation for the ones in Cambodia? Do they know who built those and why?
That's a good question. I'd have to refresh my notes on that.
They go more modern, ancient cultures, I guess. Nothing vastly
They're like
ancient.
1,500 years old. They're not supposed
Yeah.
to be 4,500 years old or something like that. And the reason why this is significant is because if the Great Pyramid is 4,500 years old, my argument is that there are connections across the oceans that are not supposed to exist.
Right.
Because according to everything, they're adamant. It wasn't until Christopher Columbus, 1492, sailed the ocean blue. But yet there's evidence that goes back more than 1,000 years prior that
Just
suggests.
press play, Jamie. Just press play so we can see some of these images because they go pretty rapid fire. And it's really, really well done, this video. And I'm glad that you gave credit to all the people that helped you out in that, too.
Yeah,
'Cause
there's
it's-
the polygonal walls. There's this nub phenomena. There's
Yeah.
these similarities across numerous continents.
Yeah. It's really wild stuff because it's so obvious that somehow or another these people had to be in communication with each other or sharing information or had carried information from other places.
Right. You know what? This is the same
Like
video
this.
that has
Look at
the Egypt-Japan sarcophagus similarity.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's earlier in the video or later in the video, but
Look
if you
at
skip
that.
around, yeah, look at that. That's
And what part of Greece is that?
It's not Athens. I'd have to double check. I made this video like 3 years ago, so I'd have to double check. I haven't looked at this in a while, to be honest with you.
Well, there's also the weirdness of the Acropolis and the Parthenon, right? Like that the Acropolis was built on the Parthenon, but like what? Who built that?
Yeah.
They don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Reminds me
Look
of
at that fucking.
that's Sacsayhuaman. Yeah, this is Peru. That's in the streets of Cusco.
Is it really Sacsayhuaman? That sounds like a hot chick.
Sexy woman. Sacsayhuaman. Yeah, it's
Italy. Look at they have them in Italy too. Wow.
Yep. These polygonal walls,
Yeah.
you can find them in
Everywhere.
Japan,
Easter
Peru.
Island.
Yeah, Easter Island.
And who do they think built these in Italy?
a lot of it's attributed to the Romans in the same way that Baalbek is all attributed to the Romans,
Right.
which doesn't make any sense. Like
Yeah.
not the foundation of it, the giant
trilithon
stuff.
stones.
Yeah,
Incredible.
trilithon stones.
Yeah,
Incredible.
800-900 tons.
Yeah, 3 of them 900 tons each, and then
Look at that. It's just so strange because it's such a strange way of constructing things, and yet it exists all over the world.
Right. It's actually the most difficult way to construct something.
is.
And we're looking at this after thousands of years.
Right.
Who knows how many earthquakes, weather erosion.
Look how good the Peru one is, though. That's amazing.
some of the details in these are astonishing. These little tiny notches but it's just matched throughout. It's matched on all the sides of the stone, and it's not just surface level either. It goes all the way through the mating surfaces of the stones. This is the Valley Temple in Egypt.
God, it's so wild.
That's the Assyrian. I can just tell by like.
Look at the
stones I know
Japan
it
one.
is.
Now, most people aren't even aware of this
No.
one from Japan.
Yeah.
And like, when do they date these Japanese structures?
I'd have to double check. I know they're accredited to be in some castle by some guy. I'd have to double check, but I'm going to go ahead and guess 1,000 to 1,500 years.
Go back just a little bit, Jamie.
But I think they're probably
The
older.
Japan one, not this one. Right there. Bam, stop. Look at the size of that one stone.
But yeah, probably 500 tons, I bet. 400 probably.
Holy shit.
Yeah, around there.
Just
Could be.
eyeballing it. I've been doing this long enough.
Yeah,
I mean, look at that gentleman who's standing there.
depends how deep it is, I guess. But yeah, it's
And imagine
it's a giant piece of stone.
him pushing that thing.
Logs and
All
olive
together
oil.
now, lift it
Who
up.
fucking put that? It's above the other ones.
Yeah,
Right? It's not even the one that's on the bottom.
yeah. It's
How?
Let's see that sarcophagus compared to the one in Egypt. I'm not sure what
And
part
look
of the
at the
video.
one above it and to the right.
oh yeah.
God. Oh, I should use this. Look at that one there.
Yeah.
That one and that one. Immense. I mean, it's just so incredible.
Keep going a little bit more. Can't be too far off. A little bit. It's
You've gone
worth
too
seeing.
far, I think.
Yeah, but I think. Because when people are about to see this, it is such an unbelievable similarity. And again, ancient Japan and ancient Egypt are not supposed to have any type of contact whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It may have been
video's
early in the
really-
video. I'm
just
not sure.
Keep going. I
It may have
don't
been one
think
of the
it
earlier
is.
part.
I don't believe so. I watched it today. I think it was later.
Maybe I would search for it, like Japanese
Yeah.
sarcophagus lid or something. I
You
forget
need
the
to
name
have
of the
those
place
little
it's in.
things where you can just jump to it.
Yeah.
Some people do that in those videos.
chapters.
This is a question. Why does he have a fucking watch on? Go back. Isn't that a watch?
How dare you? That's
Right.
impossible. Stop.
What the fuck is that?
It's jewelry.
It looks like a watch. I mean,
It
maybe
does.
it's jewelry, but it's literally on his wrist, and it's a circle, and it's with a band.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
What is that? Is that a sundial? What the fuck is on his wrist?
It's a mini Antikythera mechanism.
I mean,
it's
look, it looks
the
like my
iPod Mini.
watch.
It does.
It does.
That's crazy.
A lot of people, I saw many comments of people saying the same thing. That's a watch. But, of course, the explanation is like, of course not. Just jewelry. Nothing to see here. But it does look like it, doesn't it?
Well, it just makes sense that if they developed weapons and they developed clothing and they developed shelters and then they figured out mechanisms, if they had the sophistication to be able to construct these buildings, why wouldn't they have the sophistication to be able to construct a watch?
Right.
An automatic watch.
If you want to talk about ancient technology, speaking of this, like on the left, that trident, many accredit it to being originated from the Vajra. And did you see Elon Musk's bedside table picture that he put on Twitter?
Yes, I did, but I don't remember a trident. Was there a trident in there?
Look, the Vajra, which comes from the trident, or the trident comes from that. He had that in the lower left corner of the picture. If you were to Google Elon Musk bedside photo, lower left corner, that is the symbol that comes from ancient Hindu that is supposed to be the most powerful thing in the entire universe. This is a staged photo. I don't know if Elon Musk is trolling or if he's literally, because he's been talking about that he thinks that his life could be in jeopardy. He's going against the grain and all this freedom of speech stuff. And I don't see bottom left corner. Yeah, click on that. The Buddhism ritual object. If you Google the Vajra, Vajra, it's an ancient symbol.
Like how he has a cosplay gun and caffeine-free Diet Coke.
I don't know what that's about. He needs to get rid of those Diet Cokes.
Oh,
well, he likes it.
That's those. No.
No?
Awful.
Why?
You like that?
What do you mean, like Diet Coke?
Yeah.
I don't mind Diet Coke.
Yeah? You drink Diet Coke?
I've drank Diet Coke
You're
before.
into that artificial sweetener scene?
I'm not
Aspartame?
worried about it.
No?
Yeah.
No. When I talk to nutritionists, I don't think it's really that big of a deal.
Okay.
Depends on how much you're drinking. I mean, it
Right.
looks like Elon's drinking a
He's
shit ton of it.
Because he's got like the stains on the thing. But all right,
Yeah,
so
he's
the
drank
bottom.
4 of them, and they're caffeine-free, which is weird.
Yeah. So between that George Washington pistol and the fact this is a
That's not a
staged
George
photo.
Washington pistol. That's a cosplay pistol from a video game.
No, the one above it, the musket.
Oh, the one above it.
This
the
is a
musket.
staged photo. So the fact that he has that Vajra in the lower left corner, I wonder, this is conspiracy, which I'm all into, is he essentially sending a shot off the bow to the people who he thinks are going after him, which is that I have knowledge of something involving, because here we are, like we have Randall Carlson, you're bringing back on, there's all this speculation that there has been a limitless energy device that has come from the ancients that has been essentially redeveloped. And then in a short period of time, you have Elon Musk posting this picture while he's also talking about that he believes that his life could be at jeopardy. He's taken certain security precautions. This is a staged photo. It makes no sense. November 28th, 2022, my bedside table. This is at 3:48 a.m. What is this? Either he's trolling, and maybe, or is he trying... Why would he put that Vajra right in the lower left corner? The symbol that means that other people can correlate with a limitless free energy technology that may have once existed, and that's where the trident comes from.
So I don't understand was the Vajra? How did it supposedly work?
Oh, that is a whole other thing. Like I couldn't explain, but it's
supposed to represent limitless energy.
Some have said that it's supposed. What it does represent in Hindu culture is the most powerful weapon and device of the universe. Do you know any more about it, Ben?
Are you bunch of string?
No, I don't. I know there's the other stuff, the handbag. I was going to ask, can I go pee while you guys talk about that?
Yeah.
I have to pee too, actually.
All right, let's pause.
Really bad.
You guys go pee.
All right.
We'll be right back. And we're back. Are we back? We're back.
That was excellent.
Thank you,
Relief.
sir.
All right. So where were we? History's bullshit.
That's right. And Elon Musk has all the secrets.
He's got something. He's got some secrets. Yeah, I mean, he obviously felt very compelled to buy Twitter. I mean, $44 billion is a lot of goddamn money, and he overpaid for it. But it felt like there's a need to have some sort of an uncensored distribution of information, or at least ungovernment censored.
This is why I'm such a fan of him. Anyone at this point in time that's an advocate for free speech, I'm on your side. We live in a wild time. Anyone with their eyes that's paying attention sees that there's people controlling information. And throughout history, this has been proven time and time again to lead to tyranny when you stop people from sharing things. So I'm 38 years old, and growing up, I remember back in the day, people could say whatever they wanted. Free speech was real. You're allowed to have it. Worst case scenario, people ridicule you, and everything was fine. And now we're entering this age where things are being called dangerous, like ancient apocalypse. That's dangerous misinformation. It's like, no, the only thing dangerous is stopping people from having a voice.
Well, also, when you start attributing, when you put words on that like racism, and you start putting those kind of accusations towards, if you watch that special, the series, and you say, oh, this is racist, you're a fucking idiot. I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah.
Or you're a dangerous asshole who wants to change the reality of what this guy's actually talking about.
Right? Throughout history, anyone, whether it's the Nazis, the Stalinists, the Maoists, and everyone else, anyone that's ever censored people, the people who censor other people, they're always the bad guys historically. Always. 100% of the time. And it always leads into a bunch of people getting hurt. And it's like rinse, cycle, repeat throughout history. This is
one of the first times where educated, progressive people who think of themselves as compassionate are advocating censorship, which is so bizarre.
It's the same people, actually. Same people, same argument that they made 3 years ago against him. The Journal of American Archaeology, or the Society of American Archaeology, dedicated 27 pages in a journal 3 years ago to attacking Hancock for his book America Before.
Yeah.
Same accusations, same language, same people. And then what happened? I think what happened was when his show comes out and it's got you're there. I think Jordan Peterson was in one of the clips, and I think it triggered some of the more maybe left-leaning publications to go and look for what are the arguments being made against this, and then all those talking points get amplified and boosted, and it becomes this much bigger thing. But
they're just
same
terrified
people.
that they're losing control of the narrative. I mean, that's the big part of it, and that's the same problem they have with this podcast. The same problem they have with a lot of things that can become very popular that they can't control.
Right.
They just hate the fact that people are just able to discuss things openly and freely without them being in control of it and getting all their greasy fucking fingers all over stuff.
Right. It's unfortunate in more ways than one, because historically it always leads to like a terrible abyss of oblivion, and they never stop. That's the thing. That once they start going after tyrannical control, historically it seems like it just never ever stops until someone stops them.
Yeah, which is scary.
It is. It is scary. But the reality is that I look at this topic, there's a niche community that are into the ancients, and whether it's archaeologists that disagree with everything we just said, or other people that agree with everything Graham Hancock says, this is a win-win for everybody. I think this is an opportunity for people to unite under a common interest and then start exploring these topics. For example, if I had won the lottery, I would have, hired a bunch of archaeologists that are the biggest naysayers of anything that's alternative, and be like, hey, here's a salary. Let's get some blocks and let's start cutting this stuff and moving it and just experiment. And it's a win-win for everybody. We'll learn something new.
They wouldn't engage with you. I mean, that's one of the problems that Graham has with his detractors. They say they'll debate him, but then when he offers them to debate him, they scurry away and hide.
Right.
Because I think they all kind of know, and I don't think they're necessary anymore. Thanks to people like you guys who have really just examined all of the actual evidence without any biases or any sort of ulterior motive in any narrative that you're trying to promote. You're just looking at it going, what is it? This is wild stuff. And
Thank you.
Because of the fact that you guys exist on these platforms like YouTube, where you can get millions and millions of views. I mean, there are no mainstream archaeologists that are getting millions of views on their stuff. It's just
that's why they're bitter, envious, and jealous.
Yeah. It does drive them crazy. They actually talk about it in some of these articles.
It should. They suck.
You suck at distribution of information, and
you're ignoring the most interesting stuff.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the evidence of Atlantis, or if you're looking at these similar construction methods that exist all over the world, like how? What the fuck is the real truth here?
This is what's so interesting. So a lot of people criticize us or Graham Hancock, like, you're not archaeologists, you're not historians, you can't be trusted. But I'm like, having outside eyes come in is so important. Let me give you a quick little example I shared with Ben the other day. So I came from Target. I was investigating fraud with them, busting employees that stole from the company. And there was a story that one of the executives spoke in front of us when I was an intern. And at that time, this is like 2013, Walmart was amping up their online presence to compete with Amazon. And as the story goes, they hired some executive from Pepsi. Pepsi is far more than a soda company. It is a distributor, if it's anything. They move product from point A to point B. And when as the story goes, this executive came in and on day one saw some opportunity for improvement that made significant changes with Walmart's ability to compete with Amazon and their online presence. And it's because when you have other people coming in from outside the box, whether it's Ben coming from the tech industry and having patents with HP, should I name drop? Like some pretty cool stuff. Here I was a number of years ago watching Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I remember like going down the rabbit hole, seeing like, okay, let me see if there's some truth to these alternative theories involving bronze chisels. Is this feasible? Is it not? And so I'm convinced that any reasonably intelligent person that simply looks at all points on any side of it can see like, okay, there is something here. There is a mystery here. And going back to Graham Hancock and Ancient Apocalypse, with all the criticism he's getting, I don't hear anybody advocating for exploring the Bimini Road. I don't hear anyone asking to excavate the 25,000-year-old chamber in Indonesia. I don't hear anyone talking about anything in the show at all.
Here's what's really cool. No one's paying attention as archaeologists. There's so many more people that are watching the show. Millions of people are watching the show. And like how many thousands of people have heard the arguments these archaeologists are having? It's a blip. It's literally like they're like yelling into the abyss and no one's listening to them.
Yeah.
The nature of the discourse has changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I mean,
it has. I mean, just having a fucking look. Human beings have accumulated knowledge and information over time, and the idea that there's gatekeepers to knowledge and information, that they have to come from these accredited universities, which are now being widely discredited because of all their wacky social ideas and all the crazy shit that people. It's not necessary. There's just information, and what's happening right now with the internet is that the actual amount of information is so overwhelming. The idea that one group controls the access to information or what is legitimate about that information, it's not true anymore because there's so many like random people that are experts and that have like accumulated vast amounts of data and like that you can just pull it off the top of your head. You not even have any fucking notes you're drawing from and you're talking about all this different stuff. I mean, how many archaeologists can do that? It's like, and how many archaeologists can do it about these very specific aspects of this stuff, which is so confusing and is not being discussed in the mainstream.
Right. I am optimistic that I see comments on my channel, and you get it as well. There's people saying, I'm going to go study archaeology so I can explore these alternative topics. Yeah. I think there's going to be a new generation.
There's a lot of that. I'm sure there is.
I've been contacted by students, people that I think what's happening is that they're being, because this stuff is out there and it's becoming more mainstream, they're being forced to deal with the arguments that are being raised by guys like Graham. Like you have to go and account for the evidence. You can't just dismiss it, which is kind of the prior generation of the old guys in the old guard now. That's a lot of the approach they've taken. But I'm hopeful also that because some of these students have said that who will be the establishment academics of the future and potentially also in charge of the textbooks and whatever the official story even means.
The old guard will die off.
They will. That's Planck's.
That's really how it is with everything.
Planck's, science advances one funeral at a time.
Isn't that crazy?
It's sad.
Yeah.
It's not though. It's kind of fun.
It's kind of hilarious.
It's really amazing. It's amazing that there's access to people like you now, that you guys have these platforms like YouTube where you can just put these videos out and your videos have fucking millions of views and so do yours. It's amazing. It's really cool.
I'm very
really
grateful.
Cool.
And I want to give a plug real quick to Rumble. I've been working with Rumble. I've asked anyone who's following me, go follow me on Rumble. I've been working and talking to their team over there, and these people are serious about promoting free speech and having alternatives that are being suppressed elsewhere on their platform. And so I am about free speech. I don't care. If people disagree with someone, that's fantastic. But don't censor people. So all that said, YouTube's been very good to me, and I want to be on there forever. But hey, I need to diversify, and I encourage anyone that's into my work to follow me there. Ben, you're on there as well,
I am
right?
on Rumble as well, yep.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic that Rumble exists. I mean, the Russell Brand is over there now, and there's just so many journalists who've started to do stuff over there. It's great.
Yeah,
I love it.
Because I can channel Adam Curry for a minute and talk about when you talk about the internet and access to information outside of establishments. One of the dangers I do see in it is the fact that the internet kind of gets distilled down to these portals.
Yes.
Everyone looks at it through a portal, whether that's a Google search or a Facebook or a big social media engine. You could set up your own website outside of that, but the trick is how are people going to see it? and go and look at it. So I do see there are some efforts, and I came from that background. You hinted at it. I've worked in data center and cloud and all of that for a long time, and it's just like that control of that information is eventually going to come down to the stuff we're seeing with the Twitter files now, where it's like, hey, we need to de-amplify these things.
The Twitter files are wild.
They are
unbelievably wild.
It's wild.
Yeah.
The stuff that Schellenberger's released and Matt Taibbi and all these different people that have gone over, and Barry Weiss gone over this data, and like
crazy.
The government has had their fucking greasy fingers in all aspects of it.
Yep.
What have the conspiracies been wrong about in the last few years?
That was Elon was joking around about that on one of the podcasts that he was on, where he's like, every single one of them was right. Every single conspiracy theory about shadow banning, about lying about information, all of it.
It's got to the point
about
now.
6 months is the difference.
Yeah, it's at the point now you can figure out so quickly on who is not doing any research whatsoever. And this will sound crass, but I'm just going to say it because I know it's the truth. Most people are getting their news and information while they're sitting on the toilet, scrolling through social media, and just scanning headlines.
Yes.
And that's it. And
Including me. My wife always accuses me of that because I'll send her something. She goes, "Did you read it?" I go, "No, you read it. I sent you the headlines."
Do you not see the headlines?
Headlines, terrifying. Read that. Tell me what happens.
Yeah. It's at the point now people have to start, this is what you do. Like I remember I hate to bring it up, but the COVID stuff, and I remember watching when it was first kicking off and they were doing the White House press conferences every single day, and I was listening to every single one of them.
Yeah.
And I started to see extremely quickly that Trump would say something and then all these headlines would show up minutes later and contradict what he was saying. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Everyone's going to see very quickly that the mainstream with their little headlines are so inaccurate. That's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. In fact, what it showed me is that most people are getting all their information from mainstream headlines.
Yeah. Well, they counted on that, right? I mean, when CNN was going after me for taking horse dewormer, they were counting on this idea that they had this control of the narrative. But they didn't understand that I had already achieved like an escape velocity by that time, where I had 10 times as many people as them. So I was like, what the fuck are these people doing? And then it just discredited them further.
Right.
And literally was doing the opposite they would hope it was doing.
Right. It's because there's a difference between true and false, right and wrong, good versus evil. I genuinely believe this. And truth always comes out. People can be had. It's easy to lie and fool people. But if you continue to lie, that one lie creates 5 more, and those 5 lies create 25. And then before you know it, it's out of control and you can't keep up with it.
Yeah, but counter to that is the Soviet Union or what's currently Russia right now. If you have control of the narrative, you can hold on to that control for a long fucking time. And this is why Elon is so dangerous to the establishment. Because all of a sudden, you have one major platform that's not controlled by the government.
Yep.
In fact, when Joe Biden was tweeting shit that's inaccurate, Twitter was fact-checking him. Actually, that's not true at all. This is what you said about the economy is bullshit. And and then just the government's deleting tweets, which is crazy to see.
It's disturbing. Let's give Elon Musk a shout out. The best thing I've ever done was pay my $8, and now it's $11 a month for my blue check mark on Twitter. I've exploded on there since. I'm getting far more visibility. Best move ever. Freedom of speech. Thank you, Elon. I will gladly send you another $11 next month.
Well,
I would
when
pay
he
more.
even started talking about buying Twitter, just in the process of that, I think they must have released a bunch of shadow bans, and my shit went up 900,000 Twitter subscribers or Twitter followers in like a couple of weeks.
Wow.
I was like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
And now it goes up organically. I'm like, oh, this is what it's
normal.
Yeah, it's normal. Yeah. This is like what it's supposed to be. But during the time, I was dangerous.
Yeah,
dangerous.
And then
you gotta wrap me. Hold him down. He's dangerous. Like what?
Who allowed this?
The funniest part is all those people that drop $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. I have even heard of numbers of $20,000 that people paid for a blue check mark just a few years ago.
Really?
So, yeah, people were buying their way in. People
they
were doing
bribing people.
Yeah,
who were they bribing?
The people that work there. They're making money on the side. The same thing was going down at Instagram, and then apparently Zuckerberg, he shut that down. Which, by the way, why? I don't care about social media, but I don't have a blue check mark on Instagram, and I don't know what it's going to take to get one because this would allow me to DM people. Yeah?
Yeah.
Text.
Contact Zuck.
Zuck, yeah, he's
maybe he can get me off the shadow ban list too. There's something going on. Like I used to get way more subscribers per day. Like something happened like a year and a half ago.
It happened to me too.
I just hit a. But I think
wall.
But the conspiracy is that it's a shadow ban. But there's also a possibility that it's favoring certain things like reels.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems to favor reels now more than everything else, which is like very odd.
Do you want to know why?
Why?
So they are. Let me word this carefully.
Bad people, the evils, the dictators,
So they're
the rulers, the elites. Who?
This is. They are conditioning the human mind to be far more of a short attention span. So, like TikTok, as an example,
Right.
People can't even focus on anything that's longer than a minute or even 10 seconds. They're scrolling through and they're not able. It is conditioning people to pay attention less. I don't think it's an accident. You could just look. It could be an easy way of making money, and that might be the most simple
I think
thing.
it's an easy way of making money
Yeah.
because here's the counter to that. This podcast,
Right.
right? It's hours long. Hours.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
the most watched.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's hours long. And a lot of people watch the whole fucking thing.
Right.
Or listen to the whole fucking thing. Like, it's a lot.
I'm
So
sure-
it's like the opposite of what we thought. We thought that people aren't interested in learning things. They're not interested in exploring new ideas. They're not interested in long-form conversations. They want things to be quick.
Right.
Like, that was when I first started doing it. People were going, you got to edit this. I was like, why? Like, it's too long, so don't listen. Like, I was like, this is what I'm interested in. I'm just going to do what I'm interested in. And it worked. But,
Sure did.
But it's the opposite of the narrative. The narrative is everything has to be 10 seconds long, TikTok, keep going.
Yeah.
And we're just turning people into zombies.
Well, then that goes back. It verifies what I'm saying or validates. So it's like true and false. If they're going to put something out in short, it's not working.
Right.
I mean, it might be working in some capacity on some people, but what's this say?
New report highlights the decline of Facebook and Instagram as TikTok becomes the new
Yep.
home of entertainment. Oh, my
So
God.
if you need to get
Yep.
advertising.
Meanwhile, it should be illegal. They should fucking ban it. And
Yeah,
it's
TikTok.
like, it's total Chinese spyware.
Yeah.
And everyone is like, I'm on, I don't even care. Go into my accounts and find out my passwords.
Yeah, passwords, absolutely everything. It's
Everything.
more than just your credit card number, people. It's literally every single thing in your phone.
Every
All of it.
website you search, all the text messages you make, it tracks all of the movements that you make with your thumb, everything.
Yeah.
There's a
It's
saying,
nuts.
oh, but it's free, it's fun, it's lovely. There's
It's
a
the
saying,
best.
anything if something's free, you are the product.
You're the product.
Right. Data. Your data is the product, but it's never been exploited like it is with TikTok. And it's all, they also lied about where the data's going. Oh, it's only staying here in North America. Bullshit.
Yeah.
It's going straight to China.
Right.
It's crazy. And they're also getting biometric data from people that have fingerprint readers on their phones or face recognition. It's like there's so much data it's getting. It's really spooky.
It is spooky. And in this world that we live in, when they're controlling information, the one thing that freaks me out about talking about history is that they, as in people who are tyrants that suppress and censor people throughout history, they go after the teachers. They're on there. It's more than just artists. They'll go after the comedians. They'll go after the
Yeah.
teachers. And because it's going to be complete control at a certain point where it's like, you do not get to teach. We were talking about this last night at dinner about how, what's her face down there in New Zealand? Like anything,
Jacinta Ardern.
would she say anyone other than the government giving you information is false? What was her?
Oh,
was
the,
it-
the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Yeah, at some point she's
That
just,
lady's a creep.
Jacinta. Yeah, isn't she? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she
She's
really
making great
is.
strides for freedom. She's literally Orwellian in nature a bit. Yeah,
and
she was.
you never would have thought that before COVID.
No,
There's so many of them, like Justin Trudeau. He was
Oh,
sweet,
my-
handsome
Yep.
fella.
Yeah,
Nobody
charming.
would have thought.
stripes got shown. I think. in
Oh
a lot
my
of
God,
it.
on so many people. Gavin Newsom, so many of
Oh,
these
yeah.
fucking
Oh, my
people. They
God.
seem benign. And then COVID came along and this opportunity to control people and a reason to do so. We're all in danger and they exaggerate that danger greatly and use it to clamp down on you and force you into these pharmaceutical drugs that you have to take and do this and do that. We got to lock you at home and stay here and we're going to redistribute wealth and this and that. It's like, whoa. You guys are fucking demons. I didn't know you were demons. I thought you were just governors and mayors and shit. And shut down all the restaurants, even if it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, my wife and I were talking for a little bit about, is it time to maybe move back to Australia at some point? And then
Fuck
COVID
that
hits. It's
place.
like, no fucking way.
Where do you live now?
Northern California.
Yeah, get out of there too.
I definitely am.
That's
it's
the
a nice
next
spot.
Australia.
We're out in the sticks. It's a bunch of it's a bunch of
Northern California is wild. It's like it's a very interesting place. It's all weed growers and cartel people.
Yeah.
and I'm in Arizona. I thought
Better
I
than
was safe.
Australia still. Trust me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm in Arizona. I thought I was safe. I'm not getting into it, but what they did to Kerry Lake, I shouldn't go there. But Arizona was the last free place, or one of them, because like Texas is debatable. Florida's pretty free. South Dakota's free, but Arizona, everyone needs to be paying attention to what happened there.
Yeah, the irregularities when it came to the reports that people had at the places where they were trying to vote is really wild. Like, I wish I knew what was true so I could actually comment on it.
What I witnessed walking my dog in different neighborhoods was a lot of Kerry Lake signs, and I didn't see one single one of Hobbs. And Katie Hobbs, like, her social media on Instagram had like 6,000 followers. Like literally on the election night, compared to Kerry Lake's at like 300,000. And I'm like, that means something. It doesn't necessarily prove anything, but my point is that people I was talking to, she had a huge following. She was doing all the debates. Katie Hobbs hid. But I know what happened. I mean, I don't have proof.
What do you think happened?
Are you allowed to say these things? Right? These are the things that they go like this to you, Joe. If you go, you know what I mean? This is like one of those things where they go like this to you.
You think there was some manipulation that led to someone else winning? Perhaps.
You'd have to be stupid not to conclude that. If anyone that's looked into this, you would have. It's an insult. It's insulting my intelligence to think that something. Let me just say it like this. I just have some questions. That's all.
Well, all the people that was it Maricopa County? Is
Yes.
that the area where they had the most irregularities were also the most Republicans?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Maricopa County has a lot of blue to it too. But listen,
So,
Trump
Lake
won
has
there.
provided no evidence to support her claims of election fraud. Well, this is on Newsweek.com, which is totally unbiased.
No evidence. That's
Even
what
her
they're saying.
legal
There is-
case was thrown out by a Maricopa County judge in December. Lake has insisted that the election fraud was involved in Hobbs' declared victory and that she's the real governor.
Yeah.
Yes. But she was also saying that Donald Trump really won and he was the real president.
Well, what she
These
said
things get said
let me
almost every election.
Let
one
me
way or
quote
another in
Kerry
a lot of
Lake.
places.
I studied Kerry Lake. Let me quote her because I'm a
Are you a Kerry Lake supporter, bro?
yes. I am a supporter of anyone that's an advocate for free speech, anti-censorship, and freedom and my rights. And what she said, a reporter asked her, was pressing her on the 2020 election involving Donald Trump, and she said it very eloquently. She asked the reporter, I'm asking you, do you really think that Joe Biden got 81 million votes? And the reporter's like, do you think so? She's like, no, I'm just asking you. Do you think he did? She's like, I have questions and so do Arizonans. And that's all I'm saying. I just have some questions. I'm allowed to ask questions.
I think a lot of people voted for Joe Biden. Would a lot of people vote again? I don't think so. And I think that's why they're looking into his fucking classified documents that he got in the backseat of his Corvette.
Yeah, maybe the Democrats think that too.
They're trying to sink that dude.
Yeah, it seems like
I mean,
it.
I don't know jack shit about politics, and I'm a little suspicious
either.
of their actions. I'm like,
I can't even vote. So.
Hey,
yeah, good.
I
You're
think
better
Atlantis. I think Atlantis is in the Sahara, Africa. So just
yeah.
I don't know anything about politics
Stick to
either.
that.
Yeah, and Elon
Yeah.
Musk, let's excavate the lost labyrinth of Egypt. Let's do
Well,
that.
the problem, I mean, I think one of the problems with elections always is that you can never say there's zero fraud because, like, no one thinks there's zero fraud. Like when you say how much election fraud is there, it's not zero. So what is the number? And how much of it is Republican election fraud, and how much of it is Democrat election fraud? I don't know. You know, I remember they had that documentary on HBO back when Bush was president. It was called Hacking Democracy, and it was all about the Diebold voting systems, and that these voting systems have been manipulated to help the Republicans win. So there's always been this sort of there's always been this narrative that, you know, your elections are not fair. And a lot of that is being reinforced by these troll sites, these troll farms like in Macedonia. They have a bunch of them, and then Russia. And they've been doing that to try to undermine our faith in democracy forever. And so a lot of people, they get their information from these websites and Facebook pages that aren't even based in America, and they're purely designed to get us upset at the election process and undermine our faith in the system. And, you know, they found out that 20 out of the top 20 Facebook pages, that 19 of the top 20 were all Russian troll farms. Which is all the Christian sites. 19 of the top 20 Christian sites on Facebook were trolls. And it's like they're doing this to try to get people upset about things. And it undermines our faith in democracy, creates more chaos, and makes us more easily manipulated. It's really bad. And I really wish that we understood. Look, if so many people thought that Joe Biden would be a great president, well, now you know. Now you know he's not, and now you know he really was in mental decline. Yeah. And, well, maybe you can make a better choice in 2024, and let's sort this out.
Right. But
as soon as he said, I'm going to run again, they're like, the fuck you are. And then, I think this is the beginning of a bunch of things that'll probably come out about him.
They flipped on him. And
they'll turn on him.
Yep.
And then they'll put someone else in his place and
Newsom waiting in the wings.
Yeah, I mean, he's problematic because even they fucking hate him in California. How are they going to feel about him in Arizona? How are they going to feel about him? But it's like how much of it can be manipulated by the media. I mean, how much can people be manipulated by these headlines that you read while you're taking a shit? How much of it, how much of these narratives can be shaped to get people to say, look, it's better him than Trump. Yeah. If it's Trump, we're going to have a nuclear war. If it's Trump, we're going to have a this.
No, we're going to have
white supremacists. We're going to have a this and that. And
mean tweets, Joe. Let's focus on what's really important.
Bring back
mean
tweets.
He can't even tweet anymore because he's got to deal with True Social, it seems like. Yeah. Because they gave him his Twitter account back and he won't even use it.
Yeah, I don't think him and Musk are friends, I suspect.
Well, I don't think it's that. I don't think he's allowed to. I think he has a deal.
Really?
If I had to guess. This is pure speculation. But he has his own social media network, and it's very valuable, right? So the only way that Truth Social is valuable at all is if he's not using Twitter.
I see.
If he starts using Twitter, I mean, he has like 29 million Twitter followers or something crazy like that. If he starts using that, no one's going to pay attention to Truth Social. Right. Like, why would I go over there and watch a bunch of QAnon wackos like scream about like Pizzagate when there's Twitter? I could just go to Twitter and read what he has to say and see him, arguing with people.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Taliban's on Twitter and they just bought blue check marks. So people are mad that Trump is back on Twitter. I mean, I saw people, I'm leaving Twitter. I'm like, do you understand that the fucking Communist Party of China is on Twitter? Do you understand that the Taliban's on Twitter? Do you understand how many fucking people are on Twitter and you're mad that Trump's back?
Hypocrites.
Well, it's just like when the guy's on Twitter and he says funny shit, people can attack him and they can go after him. That's what it's supposed to be. Yeah. It's supposed to be like he says something and then let someone from the left, let Elizabeth Warren go after him, or let this person go after. Let them duke it out. Don't fucking silence people.
Right.
Especially like this idea that it's dangerous to let him speak and communicate. What about you, motherfucker? Someone's going to say it's dangerous to have
Eventually.
you speak.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to come down to it. Like they're going to keep pushing it further and further and further until like you're going to have a very narrow window of communication, a very narrow lane of your ability to express yourself, and it's not going to accurately represent people, and they're going to whisper things in pubs and whisper things in coffee shops, and that's going to be the real truth.
Yep. And this is like I was saying a few moments ago, which is that for decades throughout your life, we didn't have this censorship. People were allowed to say things. In worst case scenario, they got ridiculed and laughed at, and life went on, and everything was fine. The merry-go-round of life worked out just fine with everyone being able to say whatever they want to say. And now all of a sudden it's a problem. So they're conditioning the younger demographic to be like, you're right, this is dangerous misinformation. The younger demographic, these Gen Zs, they don't remember what I remember before, like the days before 9/11, being a senior in high school when that went down, and just how everything has slowly started changing since. They don't understand that freedom of speech was always a thing. There wasn't censorship, and everything was fine. And now they censor, and now you see problems.
Well, there's also the problem that social media, for the most part, is controlled by the left. It's almost entirely owned and controlled by tech companies who are very progressive and educated and primarily lean left.
They used to be the other way for a long time. The tech, they blow with the wind a little bit in terms of political favor and
but there's never
control,
been. But tech has always been different than
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Tech combined with social media, like that form of tech is the distribution of information tech. It's not tech like
old school tech.
Yeah, it's so different. Devin Nunes, the former California congressman who left office to run Donald Trump's app Truth Social, has remained quiet as the platform continues to be plagued with issues.
It's his app.
It's his, Devin Nunes?
No.
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he owned, his company runs it.
Yeah.
I think they have scaling issues.
Well, that's more
Well,
than a deal with it. Then, you know
No,
what I
I'm
mean?
sure someone paid for it. I'm sure he didn't buy it.
Well, I was looking up. The CEO is
I'm
Devin
sure he
Nunes,
owns it.
and Devin Nunes left to run Trump's social media.
Right,
company,
but do you think he
basically.
funded it? I'm sure there has to be some sort of a deal. I would just imagine.
That's what I was digging into.
Because I would imagine there's investors. Like, say, if you're going to open up an app, look, those apps don't do well. I mean, think about Gab and think about a lot of these other ones that they created, Getter. There's a lot of them they created. They just went away. I mean, if you got a fucking figurehead as big as Donald Trump and he's banned from Twitter and you say, this is the only way to get the voice of the king, and you put it on True Social, people are going to invest in that. And if they're going to invest in that, they're going to be very hesitant. Well, how do I know he's not going to go back to Twitter?
Right.
Well, he won't. He's not allowed to. I mean, that's just me guessing. I have no idea. I'm
Very logical.
Totally talking out of my ass. But I would imagine that he has some sort of a deal. Also, I would imagine that if that is his company, he would be wise enough to go, you know what, this is worth nothing if I go onto Twitter.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to sell this one day and make a big profit.
These are the people that invested in oil.
Yeah, so there you go.
Texas.
There you go. Look at all these people. 6.2 million. That guy invested 6.2 million. Oh my God, I want to sell you a bridge, buddy.
Yeah, since they got like $1 billion. Security reported $1 billion.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's worth $40. That's hilarious. But the money remains inaccessible pending a successful public launch. In the interim, Trump's media venture has put together about $38 million in debt, according to the SEC file. That makes sense. And that money didn't come from Trump himself, so who provided it? See, that's what I'm saying. The money didn't come from Trump himself. See, I guessed, and I was correct.
Yeah.
And
Bingo.
so let's look at all these people. So look at all these folks. Carl Pfluger. Hello, Carl. President of the Texas Oil Company. I bet he has a big hat and a fucking giant belt buckle. And he put $10 million toward Truth Social. Wow, that's a lot of money, Carl. Patrick Wall, CR Empire Holdings, company that manages multiple gym brands, $6.2 million. Kenny Trout, Texas, another Texas, telecoms billionaire, donated to Trump before, forked over $4 million. Wow, Jesus Christ.
People are all rich.
That guy, the next guy, only $200,000,
Yeah.
and $100,000. So most of the people were like, yeah, they are rich, but still, that is not a wise use of money.
Yeah.
You know, they probably got their wife. You need to donate, honey. We need to get Trump back in office.
If it said they got $1 billion in funding, whatever that just listed wasn't even close.
Yeah, that wasn't even
close.
50 million.
Yeah. Well,
was
the
the
other people are
38
probably
million debt.
hiding. The other people are probably hiding. Or maybe they got a lot of people that donated like 1,000. You know?
Yeah.
Because they got so the next one like 200,000. But that's all maybe like people have been public about
I
it.
didn't
Yeah.
see that GoFundMe link. Is all.
GoFundMe. Well, listen, gentlemen, this has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate both of you. Your YouTube page is fucking amazing. Please tell people how to get to it.
Thank you. Yes, it's unchartedx.com/c/unchartedx.
Uncharted X on YouTube. Go find it. You have
Yep.
so many great videos.
Thank you, Joe.
Amazing content, and your ability to just fucking spit it out. Both of you guys, I'm so impressed. And Jimmy, thank you so much for coming back, and thank you for bringing Ben and yours. Bright Insight. It's you have so many fantastic videos. I tweeted a couple of them today.
Thank you, Joe.
Let's do it again
Yeah,
sometime.
would
I'd
love
love
to.
to.
It was a great time.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Appreciate you guys both. Bye,
Thank you again.
everybody.